Valentina Ortiz never imagined her wedding day would begin with another man's name on her lips. As the stagecoach rattled toward Juniper Flats, she clutched a letter from Ethan Caldwell, her future husband, a stranger. But it wasn't Ethan's words that haunted her dreams. It was the storm-gray eyes of Sheriff Josiah Mercer, the man who'd offered her coffee and kindness at a dusty way station. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive when you expect it. Sometimes it finds you on the road between who you were and who you're meant to become. Stay with us until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The West Texas sun hung low and merciless, turning the horizon into a shimmering ribbon of copper and gold. Dust devils danced across the prairie like restless spirits, and the stagecoach creaked and groaned with every rut in the trail. Inside, Valentina Ortiz pressed her forehead against the window frame, watching the endless landscape roll past, miles and miles of nothing but scrub brush, dried grass, and the occasional skeletal remains of a long-dead tree reaching toward heaven like arthritic fingers. She was 23 years old, and she was running away. No, that wasn't quite right. Running away suggested fear, panic, desperation. What Valentina felt was something quieter, something that sat heavy in her chest like a stone at the bottom of a well. Resignation, perhaps. Or maybe surrender. The letter crinkled in her pocket every time she shifted on the hard bench seat. She didn't need to read it again. She'd memorized every word during the long journey from San Antonio. Dear Miss Ortiz, I am a man of modest means but steady character. I own 40 acres and a house that needs a woman's touch. I do not drink to excess. I attend church when weather permits. If you are willing, I believe we could build a respectable life together. Yours in hopeful anticipation, Ethan Caldwell. Respectable. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. You all right, miss? The man sitting across from her, a traveling salesman with a handlebar mustache and a suit that had seen better days, leaned forward with concern creasing his weathered face. You've been awful quiet since we left Abilene. Valentina managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just tired, sir. It's been a long journey. That it has. He nodded sympathetically, then launched into a story about his first trip west, something involving a broken wheel and a temperamental mule. Valentina let the words wash over her without really listening, her mind drifting back to the conversation that had brought her here. Her mother's voice sharp with practical concern. Valentina, you're not getting any younger. What do you think will happen when I'm gone? Who will take care of you? I can take care of myself, Mama. With what? Your books? Your drawings? The world doesn't pay women for dreams, mija. It pays them for being wives and mothers. And then her mother had produced the advertisement from the newspaper, the listings of men seeking wives, and Valentina had felt the walls of her small room in San Antonio closing in like a vice. She'd read the descriptions. Sturdy farmer seeks helpmate, 42 years old. Widower with 3 children needs mother for young ones. Prospector desires companion, must be of strong constitution, and felt her future narrowing to a point as sharp and inevitable as a needle. Ethan Caldwell's letter had been the least offensive. At least he'd mentioned books in his second correspondence. At least he'd asked her what she liked to read, what made her laugh, what she dreamed about when she couldn't sleep. His handwriting was careful and precise, the words of a man who thought before he spoke. But he was still a stranger. And in 3 days, she would marry him. The stagecoach hit a particularly deep rut, and Valentina's shoulder slammed against the wall. The salesman grabbed his hat before it could fly off his head, laughing. Driver must have found every hole between here and El Paso. How much farther to the way station? Valentina asked, her voice rougher than she'd intended. Her throat was parched, her dress clinging to her skin with sweat and dust. Should be just over that rise. He pointed out the window. Morgan Station. Not much to look at, but they've got cold water from a deep well, and the woman there makes biscuits that'll make you weep with joy. Valentina closed her eyes and tried to imagine cold water, tried to imagine anything but the endless rolling motion of the coach and the weight of the decision she'd made. When she opened them again, the station had appeared as if by magic, a low adobe building with a roof of weathered wood shingles, a corral with a few horses standing hip-shot in the shade, and a water trough that gleamed like silver in the afternoon light. The driver called out, and the horses slowed. The coach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust, and Valentina heard the creak of leather as the driver climbed down from his perch. 30 minutes, folks, he called. Stretch your legs, get some water, and for God's sake, use the necessary if you need to. We've got another 4 hours to Juniper Flats, and I'm not stopping again unless someone's dying. The salesman was out the door before the dust settled, stretching his arms over his head with a groan. Valentina took a moment to smooth her skirts, dark blue calico, practical and already showing the stains of travel, and tried to make herself presentable. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins hours ago, and she could feel it curling wildly around her face in the heat. She probably looked like something the cat dragged in. Respectable, she thought with bitter humor. I'm sure Ethan Caldwell will be thrilled. She stepped down from the coach, grateful for the solid earth beneath her feet, and looked around. The station was quiet, almost sleepy in the afternoon heat. A woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, probably the miracle biscuit maker the salesman had mentioned. Come on in out of that sun, the woman called. Got fresh water and cornbread just out of the oven. Valentina was about to follow the salesman inside when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the north. She turned, shading her eyes against the glare, and saw a rider coming toward the station at an easy canter. He rode like he was part of the horse, relaxed and confident, and as he drew closer, Valentina saw he was wearing a star pinned to his vest, a lawman. The horse was a big sorrel gelding with a white blaze, and it tossed its head when the rider pulled up near the water trough, blowing hard. The man dismounted in one smooth motion and led the horse to the trough, letting it drink deeply while he pushed his hat back and surveyed the station with the kind of attention that missed nothing. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their days in the saddle, and when his eyes passed over Valentina, they paused. Gray. Storm gray, the color of thunderheads building on the horizon. Afternoon, he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. He touched the brim of his hat. Ma'am. Valentina felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. Afternoon, Sheriff. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Just stopped by to check on things. How's the road from Abilene? Dusty, she said, and was surprised to hear a hint of humor in her own voice. And full of holes. That it is. He let the horse drink a moment longer, then tied the reins loosely to the rail. You heading to Juniper Flats? I am. Something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. You wouldn't happen to be Miss Ortiz, would you? Valentina's stomach tightened. Yes. How did you know? Small territory, smaller towns. Word travels. He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through dark hair that needed a trim. Ethan Caldwell mentioned he was expecting a visitor. Welcome to West Texas, Miss Ortiz. I'm Sheriff Josiah Mercer. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Valentina took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. When their hands touched, she felt an odd jolt run through her, something electric and unexpected. She pulled back quickly. Thank you, Sheriff Mercer. Josiah's fine. He studied her for a moment, those gray eyes seeing more than she was comfortable with. Long journey? Very long. Well, you're almost there. Another few hours and you'll be in Juniper Flats. He settled his hat back on his head. It's a good town. Quiet, mostly. Folks mind their own business for the most part. Mostly, Valentina thought. For the most part. Those were interesting qualifications. Have you known Mr. Caldwell long? She asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. It sounded too eager, too nervous. But Josiah didn't seem to judge. About 3 years. He keeps to himself, works his land. He's a decent man, Miss Ortiz. Quiet, but decent. Quiet. There was that word again. Valentina wondered if quiet was code for something else. Boring, perhaps, or withdrawn, or worse. That's good to know, she said, though she wasn't sure if it was. The woman from the station appeared in the doorway again. Sheriff, didn't expect to see you out this way today. Come on in and have some coffee. You look like you could use it. Don't mind if I do, Mrs. Morgan. Josiah gestured toward the door. After you, Miss Ortiz. The interior of the station was blessedly cool after the heat outside. A long wooden table dominated the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs, and a cast iron stove radiated warmth from one corner where something savory was simmering in a pot. The walls were bare except for a faded calendar and a painting of a meadow that looked nothing like the landscape outside. Mrs. Morgan bustled about, pouring coffee into thick ceramic mugs and setting out plates of cornbread that steamed when she cut into it. The salesman was already on his second piece, crumbs in his mustache, making appreciative noises. Valentina sat down at the table, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The coffee was strong and hot, and she wrapped her hands around the mug, grateful for something to do with them. Josiah took a seat across from her, not directly opposite but at an angle, giving her space. "So where are you from originally, Miss Ortiz?" Mrs. Morgan asked, settling into a chair with her own cup of coffee. "I hear a bit of something in your voice." "San Antonio," Valentina said, "born and raised." "City girl, then." Mrs. Morgan's eyes were kind but assessing. "This is going to be quite a change for you." "I know." "Do you?" The older woman's tone wasn't unkind, just realistic. "It's different out here, honey. No shops on every corner, no theaters, no much of anything, really. It's just land and sky and work from sunup to sundown." "I understand that, ma'am." Valentina kept her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of work." "Didn't say you were." Mrs. Morgan took a sip of her coffee. "Just want you to know what you're getting into. Seen too many young women come out here with stars in their eyes and romance in their hearts, only to find out that frontier life is about survival more than anything else." Valentina felt Josiah's eyes on her, but didn't look up. "I don't have stars in my eyes, Mrs. Morgan. I know exactly what I'm doing." That was a lie, of course. She had no idea what she was doing, but she'd be damned if she'd admit it to a stranger in a way station in the middle of nowhere. "Well then," Mrs. Morgan nodded approvingly, "you'll do just fine. Have some more cornbread." The conversation drifted to safer topics. The weather, the condition of the road, a rumor about a cattle drive coming through next month. Valentina ate mechanically, tasting nothing, aware of Josiah's presence across the table like a warm current in cool water. He didn't say much, just listened and occasionally nodded, but there was something about the way he was quiet that was different from the silence she'd imagined in Ethan's letters. Josiah's quiet felt intentional, like he was choosing his words carefully rather than having nothing to say. When she reached for her coffee, her hand trembled slightly. She was more nervous than she'd realized. "You all right, Miss Ortiz?" Josiah's voice was low enough that only she could hear it. She met his eyes and saw genuine concern there, not pity. "Just tired. It's a hell of a journey to make alone." "My mother wanted to come, but she's not well. The travel would have been too much for her." "And your father?" "Dead these past 5 years." The words came out flat, matter of fact. She'd said them so many times they'd lost their sting. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was a drunk who gambled away everything we had. My mother and I are better off without him." She hadn't meant to say that, hadn't meant to reveal so much. But something about Josiah's quiet attention made the words spill out before she could stop them. He didn't recoil or look shocked. He just nodded slowly. "Sounds like you've had to be strong for a long time." Strength is just another word for not having a choice. Maybe. Or maybe it's having a choice and making the hard one anyway. Valentina looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He had a weathered face, probably somewhere in his mid-30s, with lines around his eyes that came from squinting into the sun. There was a thin scar along his jawline, barely visible beneath the stubble. His hands rested on the table, scarred and capable. The hands of a man who'd worked hard all his life. But it was his eyes that held her. Storm gray, yes, but there was something else in them, something that looked like understanding. "You don't strike me as someone who scares easily, Miss Ortiz," he said quietly. "I'm terrified," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "That's not the same as being scared. Being terrified means you know what you're facing. Takes courage to do something when you're terrified." Before she could respond, the stagecoach driver stuck his head in the door. "Time to move, folks. Got a schedule to keep." The salesman groaned but pushed away from the table, patting his stomach. "Worth the stop, Mrs. Morgan. Your biscuits are still the best this side of the Brazos." "Cornbread," Mrs. Morgan corrected with a smile. "But I'll take the compliment." Valentina stood, suddenly reluctant to leave the cool dimness of the station. Outside, the sun waited, and the stagecoach, and the rest of her journey. Outside was Juniper Flats and Ethan Caldwell, and the life she'd committed to sight unseen. Josiah stood as well, putting on his hat. "I'll be heading back to town myself in a bit. I'll probably see you there, Miss Ortiz." "Probably." She tried to smile. "Thank you for the conversation, Sheriff Mercer." "Josiah," he reminded her gently. "Josiah." The name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar, too intimate. She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Ortiz?" She looked back. "You're going to be all right," he said. It wasn't a question or a platitude. It was a statement of fact delivered with quiet certainty. And despite everything, the fear, the doubt, the bone-deep exhaustion, Valentina found herself believing him. The journey from Morgan Station to Juniper Flats passed in a blur of heat and dust and rattling wheels. Valentina tried to doze, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw storm-gray eyes and heard a low voice saying, "Being terrified means you know what you're facing." Did she know what she was facing? Really? The landscape began to change as they traveled west. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and juniper trees. In the distance, she could see a line of darker green that might have been a creek or river. The light was different here somehow, softer, more golden. "Juniper Flats, dead ahead," the driver called. Valentina pressed her face to the window and got her first glimpse of her new home. It was bigger than she'd expected, a proper town rather than just a collection of ramshackle buildings. She could see a main street with a row of storefronts, several cross streets branching off, and houses scattered on the outskirts. There was a church with a white steeple, a building that looked like a schoolhouse, and what appeared to be a decent-sized stable or livery at the edge of town. The stagecoach rolled down the main street, and Valentina saw people stop to watch. A few women paused in their shopping, baskets over their arms. A group of men standing outside what looked like a saloon turned to stare. Children playing in the street scattered as the coach passed, then regrouped to follow it like a pack of curious puppies. "Quite the welcoming committee," the salesman said with a chuckle. "You're probably the most exciting thing to happen here all month." Valentina's stomach churned. She'd known, logically, that her arrival would cause talk. A mail-order bride was still something of a novelty, even out here. But seeing all those curious faces made it real in a way it hadn't been before. The coach pulled up in front of a building with a sign that read Juniper Flats Hotel and Boarding House. The driver climbed down and opened the door, offering his hand to help her out. "Welcome to Juniper Flats, miss. Hope it treats you well." "Thank you." Valentina stepped down onto the dusty street, her legs unsteady after so many hours of travel. The sun was lower now, painting the buildings in shades of amber and rose. A man was waiting on the boardwalk outside the hotel. He was of medium height and build, with sandy hair that was starting to thin at the crown, and a face that might have been handsome in youth, but had settled into something merely pleasant. He wore clean, practical clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a brown vest. His hands were clasped in front of him, and even from a distance, Valentina could see they were trembling slightly. Ethan Caldwell. It had to be. He stepped forward as she approached, his expression caught somewhere between hope and terror. "Miss Ortiz?" "Mr. Caldwell." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. For a long moment, they just stood there, looking at each other, two strangers trying to see their futures in unfamiliar faces. He was older than she'd imagined from his letters, probably close to 40, but his eyes were kind. Nervous, but kind. Welcome," he said finally. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was long, but I managed." "Good. That's good." He gestured awkwardly toward the hotel. "I've arranged a room for you here at the boarding house. I thought you might want some time to rest before we discuss arrangements." "Arrangements? Such a bloodless word for a marriage." "That's very thoughtful of you," Valentina said, and meant it. She'd half expected him to drag her straight to a preacher. "Your trunk?" Ethan looked around, and the driver was already hauling it down from the top of the coach. "I'll get that, sir." A young man appeared, the hotel porter probably, and took charge of the trunk with easy competence. The small crowd that had gathered was still watching with unabashed curiosity. Valentina felt their eyes like physical weight, measuring her, judging her, wondering if she'd last a month out here. "Perhaps we could go inside?" she suggested quietly. "Yes, of course." Ethan seemed grateful for the direction. He led her into the hotel, the porter following with her trunk. The lobby was small but clean, with a worn carpet and furniture that had seen better days. A woman stood behind the desk, middle-aged with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Ortiz," Ethan said. "The room I arranged?" "Number 4, top of the stairs, second door on the right." Mrs. Patterson's voice was brisk and businesslike. She looked Valentina up and down with the kind of assessment that could strip paint off a barn. "There's fresh water in the pitcher and clean linens on the bed. Supper's at 6 if you want it. Stew and biscuits, 2 bits extra." "Thank you." Valentina's voice was steady, despite the woman's intimidating stare. "I'll leave you to settle in," Ethan said, backing toward the door as if afraid she might bolt. "Perhaps we could have supper together, discuss things?" "That would be fine." He nodded, fumbled with his hat, and practically fled the hotel. Mrs. Patterson snorted. "That man's been a bundle of nerves for a week. You'd think he was facing a hanging instead of a wedding." Valentina wasn't sure what to say to that, so she just nodded and followed the porter up the stairs. Room 4 was small but adequate. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin and pitcher, a single wooden chair, and a small window that looked out over the street. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed. The porter lingered, clearly hoping for a tip. Valentina fumbled in her reticule and found a few coins. Most of her money was gone, spent on the journey, and pressed them into his hand. "Thank you, miss." He grinned and disappeared. Alone at last, Valentina sank onto the edge of the bed and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She'd made it. She was here. Now what? The room was stuffy, so she went to the window and pushed it open. The sounds of the town drifted up. Voices, the creak of wagon wheels, the distant whinny of a horse. Across the street, she could see a general store with barrels of goods lined up outside. Further down, there was a building with a star painted on the door. The sheriff's office. She wondered if Josiah was in there right now, doing whatever sheriffs did. Writing reports, maybe, or checking on prisoners, or just sitting at a desk with his boots up, thinking about what? Probably not her. She turned away from the window and looked at her trunk. She should unpack, hang up her dress so the wrinkles could fall out, make herself presentable for supper with Ethan. She should wash her face and fix her hair and try to look like a woman worthy of marriage. Instead, she lay down on the bed just for a moment and closed her eyes. When she woke, the light had changed. The sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and purple. She sat up, disoriented, and realized she'd been asleep for at least an hour. The pitcher of water was tepid but clean, and she used it to wash the dust from her face and hands. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a young woman with dark eyes shadowed by fatigue and dark hair that refused to be tamed. She looked like what she was, a stranger in a strange land trying to convince herself she belonged here. There was a knock at the door. "Miss Ortiz, it's Ethan. If you're ready, I thought we could walk to the restaurant." Valentina took a deep breath, smoothed her skirts, and opened the door. Ethan had changed into a clean shirt and had slicked his hair back with water. He looked painfully nervous, like a schoolboy before his first dance. "You look lovely," he said, then immediately flushed. "I mean, you look well, rested." "Thank you. You're very kind." They walked down the stairs and out into the cooling evening. The sun was just disappearing below the horizon, and the first stars were beginning to appear in a sky that seemed impossibly vast after the close confines of the stagecoach. The restaurant was a small place called the Prairie Rose, with red check tablecloths and the smell of frying onions hanging in the air. There were only a few other diners, a family with young children, an old man eating alone in the corner, and they all looked up when Valentina and Ethan entered. "Evening, Ethan," the waitress said, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes. "This must be your young lady." "Miss Ortiz, yes. We'll take a table by the window, please, Mary." They sat, and Mary brought them coffee and menus written on small chalkboards. Valentina studied hers without really seeing the words. Her stomach was too tight to feel hungry. "The roast chicken is good," Ethan offered, "and Mary makes a fine apple pie." "That sounds lovely." They ordered, and then there was silence. Awkward, heavy silences that pressed down like a physical thing. "Your letters were very," Valentina began. "I know they were probably," Ethan said at the same time. They both stopped. Ethan made a gesture that she should continue. "Your letters were very kind," she finished. "I appreciated your honesty. I tried to be truthful. I didn't want to mislead you about anything." He stared down at his coffee. "My ranch is modest. I'm not a wealthy man, Miss Ortiz, but I work hard and I have no debts, and I can provide a decent life." "I'm not looking for wealth, Mr. Caldwell." "Ethan, please." "Ethan." She tried the name out. It felt strange, like a coat that didn't quite fit. "And you should call me Valentina." "Valentina." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, made him look younger. "That's a beautiful name." "My mother chose it. She had romantic notions when I was born." "And now?" "Now she's practical." Valentina took a sip of coffee. "She's the one who found your advertisement, who encouraged me to write to you." "I see." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Disappointment, maybe. "So this wasn't your idea?" Valentina considered lying, but what was the point? They were going to be married in a matter of days. They might as well start with honesty. "No," she admitted. "It wasn't my idea. My mother is ill and she wanted to see me settled before she's gone, and I didn't have any other prospects." "I appreciate your honesty." Ethan's voice was quiet. "For what it's worth, I didn't want to do this either. Place an advertisement, I mean. But I'm tired of being alone." There was something raw in those last words, something that spoke of long winter nights and empty rooms and the kind of loneliness that carved you hollow. "I understand," Valentina said softly. The food arrived, and they ate in more comfortable silence. The chicken was good, tender, and seasoned with herbs. The vegetables were fresh. Mary hadn't been wrong about the apple pie. As they ate, Ethan told her about his ranch, the 40 acres he'd mentioned in his letter, the small herd of cattle he was building, the vegetable garden that needed tending, the house that was solid but plain. He spoke carefully, as if afraid of saying too much or too little. Valentina listened and tried to imagine herself in that life, waking at dawn to feed chickens, tending a garden under the relentless sun, cooking meals for this quiet, nervous man, sharing his bed. That last thought made her stomach clench. "I want you to know," Ethan said suddenly, setting down his fork, "that I don't expect, that is, I know this is an unusual situation, and I don't want you to feel pressured about the physical aspects of marriage." Valentina felt heat rise to her face. "Oh. I mean, eventually, of course, I hope that we'll, but I want you to be comfortable first, to know me, to feel—" He trailed off, looking miserable. "I'm making a hash of this." "No, you're not." Valentina reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "You're being considerate." "Thank you." He looked at her hand on his, and something like wonder crossed his face. "You have beautiful hands." "They're work hands," she said, pulling back. "My mother was a seamstress. I learned from her." "Can you still sew?" "Yes." "That's a valuable skill out here." Ethan seemed to relax a fraction. "The closest town with a proper dressmaker is 2 days' ride. Most women make do with what they can manage themselves." They finished their meal, and Ethan paid Mary, who gave Valentina an encouraging smile. "You two make a nice couple. Best wishes to you both." Outside, the night had fully fallen. The stars were incredible, more than Valentina had ever seen, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The air had cooled, and a breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. They walked slowly back toward the boarding house. As they passed the sheriff's office, Valentina saw lamplight in the window. A shadow moved across it, tall, lean. Her heart skipped a beat. "Sheriff Mercer works long hours," Ethan said, following her gaze. "Good man, fair, keeps the peace without too much fuss." "Your friends?" "I wouldn't say friends exactly, but we're friendly. He's helped me a few times when I've had trouble with my fences. Someone keeps cutting them, and I can't figure out who or why. That's strange. There are some men around here who don't like the idea of land being divided up, fenced in. They think the range should stay open like it used to be. Ethan shrugged. But those days are ending, progress and all that. They reached the boarding house, and Ethan stopped on the boardwalk. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon, if that's all right. We can walk around town, and I can introduce you to some people. The preacher, for one. We'll need to speak with him about the ceremony. All right. And Valentina? He looked at her with those kind, nervous eyes. I know this isn't a romantic situation. I know you didn't choose this any more than I did, but I'll try to be a good husband to you. I promise you that. Thank you, Ethan. He nodded, put on his hat, and walked off into the night. Valentina stood there for a moment, watching him go, feeling the weight of the promise she'd made pressing down on her shoulders. Then she turned and went inside, climbed the stairs to her small room, and sat by the window, looking out at the stars and wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Across the street, the lamp in the sheriff's office burned late into the night. The morning sun broke harsh and bright across Juniper Flats, spilling through the thin curtains of room 4 like an unwelcome visitor. Valentina woke with a start, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, the strange sounds of a town coming to life outside her window. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The journey, the way station. Ethan's nervous smile, the promise of a wedding that felt more like a business transaction than a union of hearts. She dressed slowly, choosing a simple cotton dress in pale green that had survived the journey relatively unscathed, and pinned her hair back with more care than she'd managed the day before. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman trying to look composed, trying to look like she belonged here, trying to convince herself that she'd made the right choice. Downstairs, Mrs. Patterson was serving breakfast in a small dining room off the lobby. Scrambled eggs, bacon that was more fat than meat, and biscuits that could have doubled as doorstops. But the coffee was strong and hot, and Valentina wrapped her hands around the cup like it was a lifeline. "Sleep well?" Mrs. Patterson asked, though her tone suggested she didn't particularly care about the answer. "Well enough, thank you." "You'll get used to the sounds. Town's quiet mostly, but Saturday nights can get rowdy when the ranch hands come in." The older woman set down a plate of eggs with more force than necessary. "You planning to marry Ethan Caldwell, then?" It wasn't really a question, more of a statement waiting to be confirmed. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Patterson's expression was unreadable. "He's a decent man. Keeps to himself too much, if you ask me, but decent. You could do worse." "That's reassuring," Valentina said dryly. The older woman's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You've got some spine, at least. You'll need it out here. This town has a way of chewing up soft things and spitting them out." Before Valentina could respond, the dining room door opened and a young woman swept in like a burst of sunshine. She was perhaps Valentina's age, with blonde hair pinned up in a style that managed to be both fashionable and practical, and a smile that could have lit up a cave. "Mrs. P, I'm here for those linens you—" "Oh!" She stopped short when she saw Valentina. "You must be Miss Ortiz. The whole town's been talking about you." "Have they?" Valentina wasn't sure if she should be flattered or alarmed. "Don't mind them. They talk about everything out here because there's not much else to do." The young woman extended her hand with easy confidence. "I'm Clara Henderson. My father owns the general store, and I help him run it. Welcome to Juniper Flats." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and Valentina felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. "Thank you. It's nice to meet you. Are you settling in all right? I know the boarding house isn't much, but Mrs. Patterson keeps it clean, and that's more than you can say for most places around here." "It's fine, really." Clara pulled out a chair and sat down without invitation, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's disapproving glare. "So you're marrying Ethan Caldwell. That's wonderful. He's been alone out on that ranch for too long. A man needs a woman to make a house feel like a home." Valentina bristled slightly at the assumption, but kept her voice neutral. "I hope I can make it comfortable for both of us." "Oh, I'm sure you will. And if you need anything, fabric for new curtains, kitchen supplies, advice on where to find the best vegetables, you just come see me at the store. I know everyone and everything in this town." "I'll keep that in mind." Clara leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, you're probably the most exciting thing to happen here since the bank was almost robbed last year. Almost? Sheriff Mercer stopped it before they even got through the door, shot the gun right out of the fellow's hand from 30 paces. Clara's eyes sparkled with the thrill of remembered drama. Everyone says he's the best shot in 3 counties. Valentina's heart did an odd little flutter at the mention of the sheriff. He seems very capable. Capable? Clara laughed. That's one word for it. Half the unmarried women in town, and a few of the married ones, if I'm being honest, would give their eye teeth to catch his attention. But he's married to his work, that one. Never looks twice at any woman. I'm sure he has his reasons. Probably does. Men like that usually have some tragic past that makes them closed off to love. Clara said this with the dramatic flair of someone who'd read too many romance novels. Maybe his heart was broken, or he lost his true love to consumption, or, Clara, stop pestering the poor girl with your gossip, Mrs. Patterson interrupted, setting down a fresh pot of coffee with a thunk. Miss Ortiz has enough to worry about without you filling her head with nonsense. It's not nonsense, it's local history, Clara protested, but she stood up with good humor. I should get back to the store anyway. Father will wonder where I've gone. But truly, Miss Ortiz, if you need anything at all, you come find me. Thank you. I appreciate that. After Clara left, the dining room felt quieter, emptier. Valentina finished her breakfast. The eggs were edible, if not inspired, and went back upstairs to her room. Ethan had said he'd come by in the afternoon, which left her with hours to fill. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her few dresses in the narrow wardrobe and arranging her toiletries on the washstand. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in cloth, were her sketchbooks and pencils. She'd brought them despite her mother's protests. What good will drawing do you on a ranch? Because they were the only things that felt truly hers. She sat by the window and opened one of the sketchbooks, flipping through pages of drawings from her life in San Antonio. The view from her window there, the courtyard of their building, her mother's hands working a needle through fabric, sketches of people she'd seen in the market, of buildings and trees and anything that caught her eye. The pages felt like a different life, one that belonged to a different Valentina. She turned to a fresh page and looked out the window, trying to capture the unfamiliar shapes of this new town. The false-fronted buildings, the wide, dusty street, the mountains in the distance. Her pencil moved slowly at first, then with more confidence as she found the lines and shadows. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice how much time had passed until a knock at the door startled her. Valentina, it's Ethan. She set the sketchbook aside and opened the door. Ethan stood there looking freshly scrubbed, his hair still damp, wearing what was clearly his best shirt. I hope I'm not too early, he said. Not at all. I was just occupying myself. His eyes went to the sketchbook on the chair, and something like interest sparked in them. You draw? A little. It's just a hobby. May I? He gestured toward the sketchbook. Valentina hesitated, then nodded. Ethan picked it up carefully, as if it were something precious, and studied the sketch she'd been working on. This is remarkable, he said quietly. You've captured the town perfectly, even the way the light hits the buildings. It's not finished, but it's already beautiful. He looked at her with new appreciation. You're very talented. Valentina felt unexpected warmth at the compliment. Thank you. My mother used to paint, Ethan said, still looking at the sketch. Watercolors, mostly. Flowers and landscapes. I used to watch her sometimes when I was a boy. There's something almost magical about seeing an image appear on blank paper. Did she teach you? She tried, but I never had the knack for it. No patience, I suppose, or no eye. He handed the sketchbook back carefully. But I always appreciated the skill. My house, our house, it's very plain. Maybe you could add some beauty to it, some drawings on the walls. I'd like that. They walked through town together, Ethan pointing out the various establishments. The general store where Clara was visible through the window, waving enthusiastically. The blacksmith shop where the ring of hammer on anvil sang out in steady rhythm. The small schoolhouse where children's voices drifted through open windows. The church with its white steeple reaching toward the endless blue sky. People watched them pass, some nodding politely, others staring with undisguised curiosity. Valentina kept her chin up and her expression neutral, refusing to show how uncomfortable their scrutiny made her. "That's Doc Miller's place," Ethan said, gesturing to a tidy house with a shingle hanging by the door. "He's getting on in years, but he's skilled. Delivered half the babies in town and set more broken bones than he can count." "Good to know. And there's the land office and the telegraph office and—" Ethan paused as they approached a building with a star painted on the door. "The sheriff's office." As if summoned by the mention, the door opened and Josiah stepped out, adjusting his hat against the sun. He saw them and paused, something flickering across his face too quickly for Valentina to read. "Ethan, Miss Ortiz." He touched his hat brim. "Fine day." "It is," Ethan agreed. "I'm showing Valentina around town. Good idea. Helps to know where everything is." Josiah's gray eyes met Valentina's, and she felt that same strange jolt she'd experienced at the way station. "How are you finding Juniper Flats so far?" "It's different from what I'm used to," she said carefully. "City girl," Josiah said, but there was no judgment in his voice, just statement of fact. "Takes some adjusting, but most folks who give it time find it grows on them." "I hope so." An awkward silence fell, the three of them standing there in the street like actors who'd forgotten their lines. Finally, Josiah cleared his throat. "Well, I should make my rounds. Ethan, you still having trouble with those fence lines?" "Not in the past week, but I'm keeping watch." "Good. Let me know if it starts up again." Josiah nodded to them both and walked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Valentina found herself watching him go, noting the easy confidence in his walk, the way people greeted him as he passed. He belonged here in a way she couldn't imagine ever belonging anywhere. "He's a good man," Ethan said, following her gaze. "Sometimes I think he's the only thing standing between this town and chaos. We had a different sheriff before him, fellow named Burke, who drank too much and looked the other way when it suited him. Things got rough. Then Josiah came, and it was like someone opened a window in a stuffy room. Everything just breathed easier." "Where did he come from?" "Not sure anyone knows exactly. He doesn't talk much about his past. Just showed up about 4 years ago with a horse and a gun and skills enough to get hired on as deputy. When Burke finally drank himself to death, the town council made Josiah sheriff. Best decision they ever made." They continued their walk, eventually arriving at the white church. The preacher was outside, tending to a small garden of struggling roses, and looked up when they approached. "Ethan, and this must be your intended." He was a round man with a jovial face and kind eyes, probably in his 50s. "Reverend Samuel Cooper, at your service, young lady." "Valentina Ortiz, it's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine. We don't get many new faces in Juniper Flats, and a wedding is always cause for celebration." He wiped his hands on his trousers, leaving streaks of dirt. "I understand you two would like to discuss the ceremony." "If you have time," Ethan said. "For a wedding, always." Reverend Cooper led them into the church, which was simple but well-maintained, with wooden pews and windows that let in streams of golden light. "Now, I like to have at least one conversation with couples before I marry them, just to make sure they understand what they're committing to." They sat in a front pew, and the Reverend settled himself across from them, his expression growing more serious. "Marriage is a sacred bond," he began. "It's not just a legal contract or a social arrangement. It's a covenant before God, a promise to love and honor and cherish through whatever life brings. Do you both understand that?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "Yes," Valentina echoed, though her voice was softer. Reverend Cooper looked at her with those kind eyes. "Miss Ortiz, I know your situation is perhaps more practical than romantic. Mail-order marriages are not uncommon out here. But I want you to know that a marriage begun for practical reasons can still grow into something beautiful if both parties are willing to work at it. I understand." "Do you?" "Because I've seen too many young women come west with stars in their eyes, expecting romance, only to find hardship and loneliness. But I've also seen women who came expecting nothing and found everything. The difference is in the willing, you see. The willing to try, to be patient, to give it time." Valentina felt tears prick at her eyes unexpectedly. "I'm willing to try." Good girl. He turned to Ethan. And you, Ethan Caldwell. I've known you for 3 years now, and you're a good man, but you're also a lonely one, and loneliness can make us do foolish things. Are you bringing this woman into your life because you want a partner, or because you want someone to cook your meals and warm your bed? Ethan flushed. Both, if I'm honest, but more the first than the second. I want someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share things with. I'm tired of coming home to an empty house. That's honest, at least. Reverend Cooper nodded approvingly. Valentina, what about you? Why did you agree to this arrangement? She could have lied, could have said something about adventure or new beginnings, but something about the church, about the Reverend's straightforward kindness, made her tell the truth. My mother is dying. She wanted to see me settled before she goes, and I had no prospects in San Antonio, no future except taking care of her until she dies, and then, I don't know, working in a shop somewhere maybe, if I was lucky. Growing old alone. She looked down at her hands. This seemed like a better option. A better option, Reverend Cooper repeated. Not a good option, just better? Yes. Well, that's honest too, and I appreciate honesty. He sat back, studying them both. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Marriage is work. It's choosing to wake up every day and try again, even when you're tired or frustrated or wondering what the hell you've gotten yourself into. It's learning to communicate, to compromise, to see the other person's perspective, even when you don't agree with it. It's building something together, brick by brick, day by day. He leaned forward, his voice growing gentler. But here's the beautiful part. When you do that work, when you commit to trying, something remarkable happens. You create a bond that's stronger than romance, more lasting than passion. You create partnership, family, home. He smiled. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love grows in the space between all that work. Ethan reached over and took Valentina's hand. His palm was warm, slightly rough. I'd like to try for that. Valentina looked at their joined hands, at this man who was nervous but kind, practical but hopeful. So would I. Then we'll have a wedding, Reverend Cooper declared. How does Saturday sound? That gives you a few days to prepare, get your affairs in order. Saturday is fine, Ethan said. Perfect. I'll make the arrangements. And Valentina, if you need someone to stand with you, to be your witness, I'm sure we can find someone. Clara Henderson is always eager to help with weddings. That's very kind. They left the church with the details settled, and Ethan walked her back to the boarding house. The afternoon sun was fierce, the heat pressing down like a weight, but Valentina barely noticed. Her mind was spinning with the reality of it all. Saturday, just 4 days away, she would become Mrs. Ethan Caldwell. Would you like to see the ranch? Ethan asked as they reached the boarding house. It's about an hour's ride, but I could rent a buggy from the livery, and we could go tomorrow. I'd like you to see your new home before the wedding. I think I'd like that. Good. I'll come by after breakfast. He hesitated, then added, Thank you, Valentina, for coming all this way, for giving us a chance. Thank you for wanting to try. After he left, Valentina went upstairs and lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Saturday, 4 days. It felt like both an eternity and no time at all. The next morning dawned clear and hot, and true to his word, Ethan appeared after breakfast with a buggy and a picnic basket. They drove out of town, heading west toward the line of hills that marked the edge of Ethan's property. The land was beautiful in its own stark way, rolling prairie dotted with mesquite and juniper, the grass golden in the morning light, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. They passed a creek that was running low but still flowing, and Ethan pointed out where his property began. 40 acres, he said with quiet pride. Took me 5 years to save enough to buy it. It's not much, but it's mine free and clear. The house appeared gradually as they crested a rise, a small structure of weathered wood with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It was plain, almost austere, but solidly built. Behind it stood a barn in better repair than the house, a chicken coop, and several corrals. It needs work, Ethan said apologetically as he helped her down from the buggy. I focused more on the barn and fences than the house, but the roof doesn't leak, and the stove works well. Inside, the house was dim and spare. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined, with a scarred wooden table, a cast iron stove, and two chairs that didn't match. A doorway led to what was presumably the bedroom, and another to a small storage room. The walls were bare, the windows had no curtains. There were no rugs on the floor, no pictures, no decorations of any kind. It was a house, but it wasn't a home. "I told you it needed a woman's touch," Ethan said quietly. Valentina walked slowly through the space, trying to imagine herself here. Cooking at that stove, sitting at that table, sleeping in that bedroom. The silence was profound, no city sounds, no neighbors, nothing but the whisper of wind through the eaves and the distant lowing of cattle. "It's very quiet," she said. "Too quiet?" She considered. "I don't know yet." They ate their picnic lunch on the porch, cold chicken and bread and apples, and Ethan told her about his plans for the ranch. How he wanted to expand his herd, maybe add some horses, plant an orchard if he could get the irrigation right. He spoke with animation, his hands moving to illustrate his points, and Valentina realized this was the first time she'd seen him truly comfortable. "You love this place," she said. "I do. It's the first thing I've ever owned, the first place I've ever really belonged." He looked out across the land with something like wonder. "My father was a drunk, much like yours. We never stayed anywhere long, always moving, always running from debts or trouble or just his own demons. I swore when I grew up I'd have a place that was mine, that nobody could take away. And you've done it." "I have. But it's lonely, Valentina. A place is just a place without someone to share it with." They sat in companionable silence, and Valentina tried to imagine making a life here. It would be hard work, certainly. Isolated, definitely. But there was something appealing about the simplicity of it, the directness. No pretense, no social games, just the land and the work and whatever they could build together. As they prepared to leave, a rider appeared on the horizon, coming toward them at an easy lope. As he drew closer, Valentina recognized the sorrel gelding with its white blaze. Josiah. He pulled up near the porch, touching his hat. "Ethan, Miss Ortiz, didn't expect to see you out here today." "Showing Valentina the ranch," Ethan explained. "Thought she should see it before the wedding." "Makes sense." Josiah's eyes went to Valentina, and she felt her heart do that strange flutter again. "What do you think of it?" "It's different," she said, then smiled slightly. "But I'm starting to think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Different can be good, gives you room to grow." He shifted in his saddle. "Ethan, I was riding fence lines and noticed your north pasture looks like it's been cut again. Might want to check it." Ethan's expression darkened. "Damn it, I just repaired that section last week." "I know, that's why I wanted to tell you. Someone's making a habit of this." "Do you have any idea who?" "Suspicions, but nothing I can prove. Keep your eyes open and let me know if you catch anyone near your property who shouldn't be there." Josiah tipped his hat again. "I'll let you folks get back to town. Miss Ortiz, I hope you'll be happy here." "Thank you, Sheriff." He rode off, and Valentina watched until he disappeared over the rise. The days until the wedding passed in a strange blur. Clara took Valentina under her wing, introducing her to the other women in town with the enthusiasm of a general organizing troops. There was Martha, the doctor's wife, who was kind but reserved. Sarah, who ran the small restaurant with her husband and had opinions about everything. Jane, the schoolteacher, who was perhaps the most intellectual person Valentina had met since arriving and offered to loan her books from her personal collection. "Don't worry about the old biddies who look down their noses," Clara said as they walked back from tea with several of the women. "Most of them are just jealous that you've got your whole life ahead of you." "Do I?" Valentina asked quietly. "Of course you do. You're young. You're about to be married. You've got a fresh start in a new place. That's more than most people ever get." But Valentina wasn't sure. Sometimes it felt less like a fresh start and more like an ending, the closing of doors rather than the opening of them. The night before the wedding, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house, listening to the town settle into silence, and tried to imagine herself as Mrs. Caldwell. Tried to imagine sharing Ethan's bed, bearing his children, growing old in that quiet house on the prairie. It was a good life, a safe life, a respectable life. So why did it feel like she was saying goodbye to something she couldn't name? She rose and went to the window, looking out at the darkened street. The sheriff's office was dark, but as she watched, she saw a figure walking the street. Josiah, making his late rounds. He moved with that easy confidence, alert but unhurried, and something in Valentina's chest ached. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and whispered to the night, "What am I doing?" But the night had no answers, and tomorrow she would walk down the aisle of the white church and promise herself to a man she barely knew. The wedding morning arrived with clouds building on the horizon, threatening rain. Valentina dressed in the best dress she owned, a simple gown of pale blue with lace at the collar, and cuffs that her mother had made for her. Clara arrived early to help with her hair, pinning it up with small white flowers she'd brought from her mother's garden. "You look beautiful," Clara said, standing back to admire her work. "Ethan's going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." "I doubt that." "I don't. You clean up remarkably well, Valentina Ortiz." At the church, a small crowd had gathered, not out of affection for Valentina, whom most barely knew, but because weddings were social events and any excuse for a gathering was welcome. Ethan stood at the front with Reverend Cooper, looking pale but determined in a new suit that was slightly too large for him. Clara walked Valentina down the aisle, serving as both witness and support, and Valentina focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The church felt too warm, too close, and her dress suddenly seemed too tight. As she reached the front, she glanced at the assembled guests, and her eyes caught on a figure standing at the back. Josiah, in his Sunday best, his hat in his hands. Their eyes met for just a moment, and something passed between them that Valentina couldn't name. Then she was standing beside Ethan, and Reverend Cooper was beginning the ceremony, his voice rolling over her like waves. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Valentina heard herself making the responses, speaking the words that would bind her to this man, this life. Ethan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. He'd gone to the jeweler in the next town over to buy it, and she did the same for him. "I now pronounce you man and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride." Ethan leaned in and pressed his lips to hers briefly, awkwardly. It was their first kiss, and it felt exactly like what it was. Two strangers going through motions. The guests applauded, and just as the sound filled the church, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming. The reception was held in the church hall, a modest affair with punch that was too sweet and cake that Martha had baked that morning. Rain began to fall as the guests filed in. At first just a patter against the windows, then growing steadily heavier until it drummed on the roof like impatient fingers. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder followed close behind. Valentina stood beside Ethan, accepting congratulations from people whose names she was already forgetting, smiling until her face ached. The gold band on her finger felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Mrs. Caldwell. That was who she was now. No longer Valentina Ortiz, but Mrs. Ethan Caldwell, wife of a rancher, mistress of a quiet house on the prairie. "You must be so happy," Sarah said, clasping Valentina's hand with damp enthusiasm. "A new bride, a new life. How wonderful!" "Yes," Valentina managed, "wonderful." Clara caught her eye from across the room and gave her an encouraging smile. Beside the punch bowl, Jane, the schoolteacher, was deep in conversation with Doc Miller about something that had them both gesturing animatedly. The church ladies clustered in one corner, their heads together like conspirators, occasionally glancing at Valentina with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disapproval. Ethan's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting but felt more like a brand. She could feel the heat of him through the fabric of her dress, smell the pomade he'd used to slick back his hair, and the intimacy of it made her want to step away. But she didn't. She stood there and smiled and accepted congratulations from strangers while the storm built outside and something equally turbulent built inside her chest. "Mrs. Caldwell." Reverend Cooper appeared at her elbow with a glass of punch. "You look a bit pale. Are you feeling well?" "Just warm," she said, taking the glass gratefully. "It's quite close in here." "The storm will break the heat soon enough." He lowered his voice. "Nervous? Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's married as many couples as I have. It's perfectly natural. This is a big change." He patted her arm kindly. Give it time, my dear. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is a marriage. Valentina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Through the window, she could see the rain coming down in sheets now, turning the street to mud. The sky had gone dark as twilight, though it was barely past noon. Quite a storm, someone said behind her, and she turned to find Josiah standing there, still holding his hat. Up close, she could see drops of rain on his shoulders where he'd gotten wet coming from the church to the hall. "Sheriff Mercer," Ethan said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't miss it." Josiah shook his hand, then turned to Valentina. "Mrs. Caldwell, congratulations." "Thank you." The formality of it stung somehow. They'd been Josiah and Valentina at the way station, in those brief moments of connection, but now she was Mrs. Caldwell, and he was Sheriff Mercer, and there was a distance between them that had nothing to do with physical space. "I should make my rounds," Josiah said after a moment of awkward silence. "Storm or no storm, duty calls." "In this weather?" Valentina asked before she could stop herself. "Surely you could wait until it passes." Something flickered in his gray eyes. "Storms are when trouble tends to happen, ma'am. People think no one's watching when the weather's bad. That's when I need to watch most." "Be careful then." "Always am." He nodded to Ethan, touched his hat brim to Valentina, and left. She watched him go, watched the door close behind him, and felt an inexplicable sense of loss. "He takes his job seriously," Ethan said. "Sometimes I think too seriously, but I suppose that's what makes him good at it." The reception continued for another hour, the guests drinking punch and eating cake and talking about crops and cattle and the storm. Finally, mercifully, people began to leave, making dashes through the rain to wagons and buggies and horses. Clara hugged Valentina fiercely before she left. "Be happy," she whispered. "You deserve it. Thank you for everything. Come see me at the store next week. I want to hear all about married life." Clara grinned and was gone, leaving Valentina feeling more alone than ever, despite Ethan standing right beside her. When the last guest had departed, Ethan turned to her with an expression that was part hopeful, part terrified. "I thought we might wait out the worst of the storm before heading to the ranch, unless you'd rather go now." Valentina looked at the windows streaming with rain, at the lightning that split the sky in jagged white lines. "Waiting seems wise." They sat in the now empty hall, listening to the storm rage outside. The silence between them grew heavy, weighted with all the things they didn't know how to say to each other. Ethan cleared his throat several times, started to speak, then stopped. Valentina smoothed her skirts obsessively, her fingers finding every wrinkle, every imperfection. "I want you to know," Ethan said finally, "that I meant what I said to Reverend Cooper. I want to try, to make this work." "So do I. But I also want you to know that I don't expect, that is, tonight we could—" He trailed off, his face flushing. "I have a spare room, if you wanted to take things slowly." Relief washed through her so strongly it nearly made her dizzy. "That would be— I think I'd like that, if you don't mind." "I don't mind." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger. "Truth be told, I'm scared out of my wits. I've never been married before. I'm not sure I know how to be a husband. And I've never been a wife. We'll figure it out together." "Together," he repeated, and reached across the space between them to take her hand. "That sounds good." They waited another hour, but the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was getting worse, the wind howling around the church hall, rattling the windows in their frames. Finally, Ethan stood with a sigh. "We should go. We'll get soaked, but my horse is getting restless tied up outside, and we need to get to the ranch before dark." They gathered their things, Valentina's small bag that held a change of clothes and her nightgown, the basket of leftover cake that Martha had insisted they take. Ethan retrieved the buggy from behind the church, and they made a run for it through the deluge. Within seconds, Valentina was drenched, her wedding dress plastered to her body, her carefully pinned hair coming loose in wet strands. She climbed into the buggy laughing despite herself at the absurdity of it, a wedding day drenching, as if the heavens themselves were commenting on her choice. Ethan cracked the reins and the horse moved forward reluctantly, not happy about being out in such weather. The road to the ranch had turned to thick mud that sucked at the wheels, slowing their progress. Rain pounded down so hard Valentina could barely see more than a few feet ahead. "There's a way station about halfway," Ethan called over the roar of the storm. "Morgan Station. We could stop there, wait it out." Morgan Station. Where she'd first met Josiah, first felt that strange connection. How far? Maybe 20 minutes in this weather. They pressed on, the buggy lurching through the mud. Lightning cracked overhead, so close Valentina felt the hair on her arms stand up, and the thunder that followed was instantaneous, shaking the ground. The horse whinnied in fear, and Ethan fought to keep control. "Easy, easy," he murmured to the animal, his knuckles white on the reins. When they finally reached Morgan Station, it appeared through the rain like a mirage. Ethan pulled the buggy up close to the building and helped Valentina down, both of them splashing through puddles that were ankle deep. They stumbled inside, dripping and breathless. Mrs. Morgan looked up from the stove where she was stirring something that smelled of beef and onions. "Lord have mercy, you two look like drowned rats. Ethan Caldwell, is that you? And this must be your new bride." "Mrs. Morgan, I'm sorry to impose, but the storm—" "Say no more. You can't travel in this. I've got rooms upstairs if you need them, or you can just dry off by the fire here." Her sharp eyes took in their wedding clothes. "Got married today, did you?" "Just this afternoon," Ethan said. "Well, congratulations. Shame about the weather, but they say rain on a wedding day is good luck." Mrs. Morgan bustled about, producing towels that were rough but clean. "Get out of those wet things before you catch your death." "I've got a robe you can borrow, Mrs. Caldwell. And Ethan, I think there's some spare clothes of my late husband's that might fit you." Valentina went upstairs to change, grateful for the privacy and the chance to peel off the soaked wedding dress. The robe Mrs. Morgan provided was old and faded but warm, and she wrapped herself in it, trying to finger-comb her wet hair into some semblance of order. When she came back down, Ethan was already by the fire, wearing clothes that were slightly too large for him, his hair sticking up in wet spikes. He looked younger somehow, less like the nervous groom and more like a boy caught in an adventure. "Better?" he asked. "Much." Mrs. Morgan pressed cups of hot coffee into their hands and went back to her stew. "You two must be starving. Didn't get much chance to eat at your own reception, I'd wager." "Nobody ever does." "We ate some cake," Valentina offered. "Cake's not a meal. Sit down, both of you. The stew will be ready in a few minutes, and I've got fresh bread." They sat at the long wooden table, the same one where Valentina had sat weeks ago, and sipped their coffee. The storm continued to rage outside, but here in the warm interior of the station, with the fire crackling and the smell of food in the air, it felt distant, almost unreal. "I remember you," Mrs. Morgan said suddenly, pointing at Valentina with her wooden spoon. "You came through on the stagecoach, met Sheriff Mercer here." "Yes, ma'am." "Thought you looked familiar. How time flies. Seems like just yesterday you were a nervous girl on her way to meet her intended, and now here you are married." She dished up stew into thick bowls. "Life moves fast out here. You don't get a lot of time to dither." They ate, and the food was good, hearty and simple, and exactly what Valentina needed. As she ate, she found herself relaxing slightly. Maybe this was what marriage would be like. Quiet moments of simple comfort, building slowly into something more substantial. "How long have you been married, Mrs. Morgan?" Valentina asked. "Was married, dear. My Henry died 3 years ago come winter. Heart just stopped one day while he was chopping wood. Dropped like a stone." She said it matter-of-factly, but there was old pain in her eyes. "We had 32 years together, good years mostly. Fought like cats and dogs sometimes, but we always made up before bed. That was our rule. Never go to sleep angry." "That's good advice," Ethan said. "It is. Marriage is work, like I told you before, young lady, but it's good work if you're both pulling in the same direction." She refilled their coffee cups. "My Henry wasn't a romantic man, never wrote me poetry or brought me flowers, but he fixed the roof when it leaked, and he held my hand when I lost our babies, and he made me laugh even when times were hard. That's love, if you ask me. Not the fireworks and fancy words, but the steady presence, the showing up." Valentina thought about Ethan's letters, his careful honesty, his promise to try. Maybe Mrs. Morgan was right. Maybe that was enough. The storm continued for another hour before finally beginning to ease. The thunder grew more distant, the rain softening from a roar to a steady patter. Ethan went to check on the horse and came back reporting that the worst had passed. "We should be able to make it to the ranch now," he said. "Road will still be muddy, but passable." Valentina changed back into her damp wedding dress. There was nothing else to wear, and they thanked Mrs. Morgan profusely for her hospitality. "You're welcome any time," the older woman said, pressing a package of leftover stew into Ethan's hands. "And you, young lady, remember what I said. Show up and keep showing up. That's the secret." They set out again, the landscape transformed by the storm. Everything looked washed clean, the air smelling of sage and wet earth. The sky was clearing in the west, and rays of late afternoon sun broke through the clouds in golden columns that looked almost biblical. When they reached the ranch, Ethan helped Valentina down from the buggy with more care than necessary, as if she might break. "Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell." Home. The word echoed strangely in her ears. The house looked even smaller and plainer after being away, and Valentina felt a pang of something that might have been regret or might have been fear, but she pushed it down and followed Ethan inside. "I'll get a fire going," he said, immediately busying himself at the fireplace. "Warm the place up, and I should see to the animals. The storm probably spooked them. Can I help?" No, you just settle in. Make yourself comfortable." He looked around the bare room helplessly. "I'm sorry it's not more welcoming. I should have done something. Put up curtains or pictures or something." "It's fine, Ethan, really." He nodded, grabbed a coat, and hurried out to the barn, leaving Valentina alone in the house that was now supposed to be hers. She walked slowly through the rooms, trying to imagine them as spaces where she would live. The kitchen where she would cook 3 meals a day. The main room where she would sit in the evenings. The bedroom where she would sleep, alone tonight, but eventually with Ethan beside her. In the spare room, she found a narrow bed with clean sheets and a small table with an oil lamp. This would be her space for now, her refuge. She was grateful for it and guilty about her gratitude in equal measure. She changed out of her wedding dress and hung it carefully, though it would need serious work to recover from the soaking. In her simple cotton dress, she felt more like herself. She unpinned her hair and let it fall loose, brushing out the tangles. Through the window, she could see Ethan in the barn, moving among the animals with easy competence. This was where he belonged, where he was most himself. Not in awkward social situations or making conversation with a near stranger who was now his wife, but here, working with his hands, tending his land. A movement caught her eye, a rider approaching the house. Even at a distance, she recognized the sorrel gelding with its white blaze. Josiah. Her heart did that foolish flutter again, and she hated herself for it. She was a married woman now. She had no business reacting to another man this way. She went to the door as he dismounted, tying his horse to the rail. He looked up and saw her, and something complicated crossed his face. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, touching his hat. "Just making my rounds, checking that everyone made it through the storm all right." "We're fine, thank you. We waited it out at Morgan Station." "Smart choice. Road was nearly impassable for a while." He glanced toward the barn. "Ethan around?" "Seeing to the animals." "I'll just check on him if you don't mind. Had some reports of cattle running loose during the storm, and I wanted to make sure none of his got out." Before Valentina could respond, Ethan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Sheriff, everything all right?" "Just checking. Storm do any damage?" "Nothing major. Couple of shingles off the barn roof, but I can fix those tomorrow." Ethan walked over, and the two men stood talking in low voices. Valentina watched from the doorway, hugging her arms around herself despite the warmth. She should go inside, start preparing something for supper, begin the work of being a wife. But she stood there, unable to look away from Josiah's profile, the way he stood with one hip cocked, completely at ease in his own skin. After a few minutes, Josiah looked back at the house, at her standing there. Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them that made her breath catch. Ethan noticed. She saw him glance between them, saw confusion cloud his expression. "Valentina, you feeling all right?" She forced herself to look at her husband. "Just tired. It's been a long day." "Of course." Ethan turned back to Josiah. "Thanks for checking on us, Sheriff." "Any time." Josiah mounted his horse in one smooth motion. "You folks have a good evening, and congratulations again on your marriage." He rode away without looking back, and Valentina felt something tear inside her chest. That evening, they ate Mrs. Morgan's leftover stew heated on the stove, sitting across from each other at the scarred wooden table. Ethan tried to make conversation, talking about his plans for the ranch, asking about her mother, discussing what supplies they might need from town, but it all felt forced, like they were reading lines from a script neither of them had memorized properly. After supper, Ethan showed her where everything was: the pump for water, the root cellar, the henhouse where she'd need to collect eggs each morning. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose, and for a moment Valentina could see the beauty in it, the vast sweep of land and sky. "It's peaceful here," she said quietly. "It is. Sometimes too peaceful. Gets lonely." Ethan hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you're here, Valentina, even if the circumstances aren't ideal." "So am I." She tried to mean it. As full dark fell, they went back inside. Ethan banked the fire and lit the lamps, and the house filled with soft golden light that made it feel almost cozy. "I should turn in," Valentina said. "I'm exhausted." "Of course. Your room is ready. The spare room, I mean. There's fresh water in the pitcher and extra blankets if you need them." Ethan stood awkwardly, clearly unsure what to do next. Do we... Valentina took pity on him and stepped forward, standing on her toes to press a brief kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Ethan. Thank you for being patient with me." Relief flooded his face. "Good night, Valentina. Sleep well." She retreated to the spare room and closed the door, leaning against it with her eyes shut. Her wedding night, and she was sleeping alone in a narrow bed in a strange house, listening to her husband moving around in the next room. This was her life now. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep was elusive. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of floorboards as Ethan prepared for bed, the settling of the house, the distant cry of a coyote. Through the thin walls, she could hear Ethan moving around his room, and she imagined him lying awake too, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Finally, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into uneasy dreams. The days that followed settled into a routine that was both comforting and suffocating. Valentina rose at dawn with Ethan, made breakfast while he saw to the animals, then spent her days trying to make the house feel like a home. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, reorganized cabinets that held almost nothing, and tried to stretch their limited supplies into varied meals. Ethan was unfailingly kind, but distant. They ate together, worked side by side, exchanged pleasantries, but there was a wall between them that neither knew how to breach. At night, they retreated to separate rooms, and if Ethan was disappointed by this arrangement, he never said so. A week after the wedding, Valentina took the buggy into town for supplies. She needed fabric for curtains, thread, flour, sugar, eggs. The list went on. Ethan had given her money and told her to buy whatever she thought they needed, trusting her judgment in a way that was both touching and terrifying. Clara practically pounced on her when she walked into the general store. "Valentina, or should I say Mrs. Caldwell, how's married life? Tell me everything." "There's not much to tell," Valentina said, keeping her voice light. "We're settling in." "Settling in," Clara repeated with a knowing look. "That's what they all say. But really, how is it? Is Ethan treating you well?" "He's very kind." "But," Clara leaned in conspiratorially, "but nothing. It's just different than I expected." "Different how?" Valentina couldn't explain, not without revealing more than she wanted to. How could she tell Clara that she felt like a ghost in her own life, going through motions but never quite connecting? That every night she lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the silence and wondering if this hollow feeling would ever fill? "Just different," she said finally. "I'm still adjusting." Clara studied her for a long moment, then squeezed her hand. "Give it time. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? That's what Reverend Cooper always says." "That's what everyone says." Valentina filled her basket with supplies, chatting with Clara about innocuous things: the weather, the harvest, the new family that had moved in on the edge of town. As she was paying, the door opened and Josiah walked in. He stopped short when he saw her, and Valentina felt her pulse quicken despite herself. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said after a moment. "Clara." "Sheriff," they said in unison. He moved past them to the counter, placing an order with Clara's father for ammunition and some other supplies. Valentina should have left. She had everything she needed, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. "How's ranch life treating you?" Josiah asked, not quite looking at her. "It's an adjustment," she admitted. "I imagine so. City to prairie is quite a change." The quiet is the strangest part. In San Antonio, there was always noise, vendors calling, carriages passing, neighbors arguing. Here, sometimes the silence is so complete it feels like pressure against my ears. She hadn't meant to say all that, but something about Josiah made words spill out before she could catch them. "You get used to it," he said quietly. "Eventually you start to hear all the sounds within the silence. Wind through the grass, birds calling, the earth itself breathing." "That sounds almost poetic, Sheriff." "I've been accused of worse things." The corner of his mouth quirked up, almost a smile. Clara looked between them with sharp interest, and Valentina felt heat rise to her cheeks. She grabbed her basket quickly. "I should go. Ethan will wonder where I am." "Of course. Give him my regards." She fled the store, her heart pounding, angry at herself for reacting this way. She was married. She'd made her choice. Whatever she felt when she looked at Josiah Mercer was irrelevant, inappropriate, and needed to stop. But that night, lying alone in her narrow bed, it was gray eyes she saw when she closed her own. The second week brought new challenges. One of Ethan's cows got sick, and he spent 2 days nursing it back to health with a dedication that was both admirable and exhausting to watch. Valentina helped where she could, learning to mix medicine and hold the animal still while Ethan administered it. Working together created a strange intimacy. Their hands would brush as they passed tools, their shoulders would bump as they moved around the stall. Once, when the cow bucked unexpectedly, Ethan grabbed Valentina and pulled her out of the way, holding her against him for a moment longer than necessary. "Sorry," he said, releasing her quickly. "Didn't mean to grab you like that." "It's all right. Thank you for the rescue." That night, for the first time, he knocked on her door after she'd retired to her room. "Valentina, are you awake?" She opened the door, pulling her robe tighter. "Is something wrong?" "No, I wanted to thank you for helping with the cow. I know it's not pleasant work." "We're partners, aren't we? That's what partners do." "Are we?" He looked at her intently. "Partners? I'm trying to be." "I know you are. I know this isn't easy for you." He ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up. "I'm not an exciting man, Valentina. I don't have grand dreams or romantic gestures. This ranch, this quiet life, it's all I have to offer, and I'm starting to think it's not enough." Her heart contracted with something that might have been pity or guilt or both. "Ethan, I see the way you look sometimes, like you're somewhere else, like you're waiting for something to happen or wishing you were anywhere but here." His voice was quiet, resigned. "I'm not blind, Valentina. I know you didn't want this, didn't want me." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" She wanted to deny it, to reassure him, but the words stuck in her throat. Because he was right, wasn't he? She'd come here out of obligation, out of lack of options, out of everything except genuine desire. "I'm trying," she said finally. "I'm really trying, Ethan." "I know, so am I." He stepped back. "I just wanted you to know that if you're unhappy, if this isn't working, I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't hold you to vows made under duress." "I wasn't under duress." "Weren't you? Your mother dying, no prospects, no money. What choice did you really have?" He smiled sadly. "I'm not a fool, Valentina. I knew what I was getting into when I placed that advertisement. I just hoped—" He trailed off. "Hoped what?" "That maybe it could become real, that maybe we could build something genuine." He turned away. "Good night, Valentina. Thank you again for your help today." He walked back to his room, and Valentina stood in her doorway, feeling like she'd been punched in the gut. The worst part was that he was right about everything: her reluctance, her distance, her inability to commit fully to this life, and she had no idea how to fix it. The third week brought the first frost, turning the prairie grass silver in the mornings. Valentina woke early one day to find Ethan already gone, a note on the kitchen table saying he'd ridden out to check the far pasture and would be back by noon. She made coffee and stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over land that was slowly, grudgingly becoming familiar. In the distance, she could see the line of trees that marked the creek, and beyond that, the purple smudge of mountains on the horizon. She was getting used to the quiet now, just as Josiah had said she would. She could hear the wind in the grass, the calls of birds she couldn't name, the distant lowing of cattle. It was peaceful, she supposed, in its way. But peaceful wasn't the same as happy. She spent the morning working on the curtains she'd been sewing, her mother's training serving her well. The fabric was simple calico, but she'd chosen a cheerful yellow that would brighten the rooms. As she worked, she found herself humming, an old song her mother used to sing when Valentina was small. Around mid-morning, she heard hoofbeats and looked up, expecting Ethan. But the rider that appeared was on a sorrel gelding with a white blaze. Her heart jumped into her throat. Josiah dismounted and walked to the porch, his expression serious. "Mrs. Caldwell, is Ethan home?" He rode out to the far pasture. "Is something wrong?" "Not sure yet. Found tracks near his north fence line. Looks like someone's been camping there. Might be nothing, but I wanted to let him know." "Do you want to wait for him?" "He should be back soon." Josiah hesitated, and Valentina could see the war playing out in his expression. Duty versus something else, something that made her pulse race. "I could use some water," he said finally. "Horse is thirsty." "Of course. There's a trough by the barn, and I can bring you some coffee if you'd like." He nodded and led his horse away while Valentina went inside to pour coffee with hands that trembled slightly. This was foolish, dangerous. Nothing could happen. Nothing would happen, but her body didn't seem to understand that. When she brought the coffee out, Josiah was standing in the barn doorway, looking out at the land. He'd removed his hat, and his dark hair was mussed from the wind. "It's beautiful country," he said quietly. "Hard, but beautiful." "That's what everyone says? Hard, but beautiful." As if the difficulty makes the beauty somehow more valuable. He turned to look at her, taking the coffee cup carefully so their fingers didn't touch. "Doesn't it, though? Things that come easy don't tend to last. And things that come hard, sometimes they're worth fighting for." The air between them felt charged, electric, like before a storm. Valentina knew she should go back to the house, should maintain proper distance, but she couldn't seem to move. "Sheriff Mercer." "Josiah," he said quietly. "Josiah, then." She took a breath. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right. At the way station when we first met, did you feel it too? That connection?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Yes." The single word hung between them like a confession. "I'm married," Valentina said, as much to herself as to him. "I know. To a good man. A kind man. I know that too. So whatever this is, it can't happen. It can't be anything." "I know." Josiah set down his coffee cup, his jaw tight. "Why did you ask then? Why make me say it out loud?" "Because I needed to know I wasn't crazy, that I didn't imagine it. You didn't imagine it." He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, and the naked honesty in them made her breath catch. "But you're right. It can't be anything. You made a commitment. I respect that. And Ethan is a good man who deserves better than to be betrayed by his wife and the man he calls friend. Then we agree. We agree." But neither of them moved. The moment stretched between them, taut as a wire, and Valentina felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to either step back or fall. A sound in the distance broke the spell. Hoofbeats, approaching rapidly. Ethan, returning from the pasture. Josiah stepped back quickly, putting proper distance between them. By the time Ethan rode up, they were standing several feet apart, the picture of propriety. "Sheriff," Ethan said, dismounting, "what brings you out here?" "Found some tracks near your north fence. Wanted to let you know." As the men talked, Valentina retreated to the house, her heart hammering. She leaned against the door, eyes closed, and knew with terrible certainty that she was in trouble. Because she'd made a promise to Ethan, had stood before God and witnesses and vowed to honor him. But her heart, foolish and stubborn, had other ideas. And she had no idea what to do about it. The confession hung in Valentina's mind for days after, a weight she carried through every mundane task. She churned butter with shaking hands, collected eggs while her thoughts spiraled elsewhere, and kneaded bread dough with more force than necessary, trying to punish the restlessness out of her body. Nothing helped. The knowledge that Josiah felt it too, that strange, undeniable pull, had somehow made everything worse instead of better. She threw herself into work with desperate energy. The yellow calico curtains went up in the main room, transforming the space with their cheerful brightness. She scrubbed the floors until they gleamed, organized the sparse pantry with military precision, and started a vegetable garden plot near the house, even though the season was nearly over. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. Ethan noticed the frenzy of activity, but misread it as enthusiasm for her new role. He came in one evening to find her rearranging the furniture for the third time that week, her hair escaping its pins and her cheeks flushed with exertion. "You don't have to work so hard," he said gently, taking the chair she was struggling with and moving it where she pointed. "The house is fine. More than fine. It's starting to feel like a real home." "I just want it to be nice for you," Valentina said, which was true but not the whole truth. What she couldn't say was that the work kept her from thinking, from feeling, from dwelling on gray eyes and moments of connection that shouldn't have happened. "It's already nice because you're here." Ethan set the chair down and looked at her with such earnest gratitude that guilt twisted like a knife in her chest. "Valentina, I know things are still adjusting between us, but I want you to know that I see the effort you're making. It means everything to me." She managed a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "I'm trying, Ethan. I really am." "I know." He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture both tender and uncertain. "You don't have to try so hard. Just being here, sharing this life with me. That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for either of them. And they both knew it, even if they couldn't say it out loud. That night, Valentina lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to Ethan move around in his room. How long could they continue this strange dance of politeness and distance? How long before one of them broke and demanded something real, something more than this hollow partnership built on practicality and obligation? The answer came sooner than she expected. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and clear, when Clara Henderson appeared at the ranch driving a small wagon loaded with supplies. Valentina was hanging laundry when she heard the rattle of wheels and looked up to see her friend waving enthusiastically. "Surprise!" Clara called, pulling the wagon to a stop. "I come bearing gifts and gossip, both equally important." Valentina laughed despite herself, the first genuine laugh she'd managed in days. "What are you doing out here? Can't a friend visit? Besides, Mrs. Patterson got in a shipment of fabric from back east, and I thought you might want first pick before the church ladies descend like locusts." Clara climbed down from the wagon with the ease of someone who'd been driving since childhood. "Also, I was bored. The store is dead on Tuesdays, and Father said I could take a few hours." They unloaded the wagon together, bolts of fabric in various patterns and colors, thread in a rainbow of shades, buttons and lace and ribbons that seemed impossibly frivolous out here on the prairie. But Valentina felt something in her chest loosen at the sight of them, these small luxuries that connected her to the person she used to be. "This is too much. I can't possibly afford—" "Consider it a belated wedding gift." "Well, some of it. The rest you can pay for when you're able." Clara waved away her protests. "Besides, I have an ulterior motive. I need your help with something." "What kind of help?" "The church is organizing a social next month. Dancing, food, the whole works. They want to raise money for a new roof, and I volunteered to help with decorations. Problem is, I have no artistic sense whatsoever, but you do. I've seen your sketches." "How did you see my sketches?" "Ethan showed me one when he came into the store last week. The one you did of the town. It was beautiful, Valentina. You have real talent." Clara grabbed her hands with enthusiasm. "So what do you say? Will you help me? It would give you a chance to get to know more people, and honestly, I could really use your eye for this." Valentina felt a flutter of something that might have been interest or might have been fear. A social meant people, conversation, being Mrs. Caldwell in public, rather than just in the privacy of this quiet ranch. But it also meant a project, something creative to sink her energy into. I suppose I could help, she said slowly. Excellent. Oh, this is going to be wonderful. We can plan it all out, make sketches, figure out what materials we need. Clara's enthusiasm was infectious. And you'll get to meet people properly. Half the town still barely knows you, which is ridiculous. You've been here over a month. Has it been that long? Valentina realized with a start that Clara was right. 5 weeks since she'd arrived in Juniper Flats. 5 weeks of this strange half-life, neither fully married nor fully herself. They spent the afternoon on the porch, sketching ideas for decorations while drinking the lemonade Clara had thoughtfully brought in a jug. It felt good to draw again, to let her mind focus on lines and shapes and colors rather than the tangled mess of her feelings. Clara chattered away about town gossip, who was courting whom, which rancher was feuding with which farmer, the latest scandal involving the saloon owner's daughter. And Sheriff Mercer arrested Tommy Wilson last week for being drunk and disorderly, Clara said, shading in part of a flower design. 3rd time this month. His poor mother is beside herself. At the mention of Josiah, Valentina's pencil slipped, leaving an unwanted mark across her sketch. She tried to fix it, focusing too intently on the paper. Sheriff Mercer seems very dedicated to his job, she said, aiming for casual and hitting somewhere around strained. Dedicated is one word for it. Obsessed might be another. Clara looked up from her work. I swear that man never sleeps. He's always making rounds, checking on things, riding out to investigate this or that. Jane thinks he's running from something, a tragic past, you know. Everyone seems to think he has a tragic past. Well, he must have something in his history. Men don't become that closed off without reason. Clara tilted her head, studying Valentina with sudden interest. You've talked to him a few times, haven't you? What's your impression? Valentina kept her eyes on her sketch. He seems like a good man. Honorable. Committed to keeping the peace. That's it? That's all you've got? What else should there be? I don't know. It's just... Clara hesitated, then plunged forward. Okay, I'm going to say something, and you can't get mad at me. Valentina's stomach tightened. What? There's talk. Just a little, mind you, and probably nothing. But Sarah mentioned to Martha, who told Jane, who told me, that when you and the sheriff are in the same place, there's a sort of tension. Clara said it quickly, as if speed would soften the impact. Tension. Valentina forced herself to look up, to meet her friend's eyes. What kind of tension? The kind that makes people uncomfortable. Not in a bad way, just in an aware way. Like everyone in the room can feel something even if nothing's actually happening. Clara reached out and squeezed her hand. I'm not accusing you of anything, Valentina. God knows you've been nothing but proper. It's just, people notice things. And in a town this small, what people notice becomes what people talk about. Valentina felt her face flush hot. There's nothing happening between me and Sheriff Mercer. Nothing at all. I barely know the man. I believe you. But maybe it would be good to be extra careful. For your own sake and Ethan's. Clara's expression was sympathetic. I know this isn't easy, being the new wife, everyone watching, everyone waiting to see if you'll succeed or fail. It's unfair, but it's reality. I understand. Do you? Because I like you, Valentina. I think we could be real friends, and I don't want to see you get hurt, or hurt Ethan, or give this town ammunition to use against you. Clara's voice grew softer. Out here, reputation is everything for a woman. One whisper of impropriety can follow you forever. The words settled over Valentina like a shroud. She'd been naive to think that moment in the barn had gone unnoticed, that the pull between her and Josiah was invisible to others. Of course people had seen. Of course they were watching, judging, waiting. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. I'll be more careful. Good. Clara brightened deliberately, clearly ready to move past the awkward moment. Now, back to these decorations. What do you think about using autumn leaves? We could press them and string them together. They worked until the sun began to lower, and Clara packed up her things with promises to return the following week to continue planning. After she left, Valentina stood in the yard watching the dust settle from the wagon wheels, feeling more alone than ever. When Ethan came in from the fields that evening, she had supper ready, fried chicken, biscuits, and green beans from the last of the garden harvest. They ate in their usual semi-comfortable silence, but halfway through the meal, Ethan set down his fork. Clara came by today? Yes. She brought fabric and asked for help planning the church social. That was kind of her. She's a good friend to you. He studied her face. Everything all right? You seem quiet. Just tired. You've been working too hard. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Valentina, I've been thinking about us, about this arrangement we have. Her heart began to pound. What about it? It's been over a month, and we're still living like strangers under the same roof. Separate rooms, separate lives. That's not a marriage. He took a breath. I'm not trying to pressure you, but I think we need to talk honestly about what we want this to be. What do you want it to be? Real. I want it to be real. His hand tightened on hers. I'm not asking for love. I know that takes time, maybe more time than we'll ever have. But I'm asking for partnership, true partnership, sharing a bed, sharing our lives, working towards something together instead of just existing side by side. Valentina felt panic rise in her throat. Ethan, I know you don't love me. I'm not a fool. His voice was steady, but sad. But you're my wife, Valentina. And I want a wife, not a housekeeper who sleeps in the spare room. If that's not something you can give me, then we need to decide what to do about this marriage. What are you saying? I'm saying that I release you from your vows if you want to be released. We can go to the preacher, explain the situation, get an annulment. You can go back to San Antonio or anywhere else you want. I won't hold you here against your will. The offer hung between them, both liberation and accusation. Valentina stared at their joined hands, his rough and work-worn, hers smaller but equally callous now from weeks of ranch work, and tried to sort through the tangle of her feelings. She didn't love Ethan. That was the brutal truth. But she'd made a promise, and despite everything, he was a good man who deserved better than a wife who dreamed of someone else. I don't want an annulment, she heard herself say. You don't? No, I made a commitment. I intend to honor it. She looked up, meeting his eyes. But I need more time, Ethan. I know it's been over a month, but I'm still adjusting to all of this. To you, to this life, to being a wife. How much time? I don't know. I need to feel like I'm choosing this, not just going along with it because I have nowhere else to go. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I can respect that. But Valentina, I need you to choose, one way or another, because this limbo we're living in, it's killing me. I understand. Do you? He pulled his hand back. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're waiting for something, or someone, and I can't compete with a ghost. The words hit too close to home. Valentina opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. What could she say that wouldn't be a lie? The days that followed were strained. Ethan was polite but distant, and Valentina caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that broke her heart, hope and resignation battling for dominance. She threw herself into preparations for the church social, spending hours at Clara's house working on decorations, grateful for the excuse to be away from the ranch. It was during one of these working sessions, 2 weeks before the social, that disaster struck. Valentina was in town, having lunch with Clara at the Prairie Rose, when a young boy burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. Sheriff needs help! There's been an accident at the Caldwell Ranch. Valentina's blood turned to ice. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to move. What happened? Is Ethan all right? Don't know, ma'am. Sheriff just said to fetch Doc Miller and anyone who could help. She ran. Down the street, past startled townspeople, to the livery where she practically threw money at the stable hand for the fastest horse. She rode hard toward the ranch, her heart hammering, prayers tumbling from her lips that Ethan was all right, that she wouldn't lose him before she'd figured out how to truly be his wife. When she arrived, she found chaos. Doc Miller's buggy was already there, and several men from neighboring ranches were clustered near the barn. Josiah's sorrel gelding was tied to the rail, and Valentina could see the sheriff directing operations with calm authority. She slid off her horse and ran to him. Where's Ethan? What happened? Josiah turned, and relief flashed across his face before he schooled his expression to professional concern. He's in the barn. There was an accident with one of the horses, got spooked and kicked him. Doc Miller's with him now. Is he? He's alive, conscious, asking for you. Josiah touched her arm briefly, a gesture of comfort that lasted only a moment. Go on. He needs to see you're all right. She found Ethan lying on a bed of hay, his face pale and drawn with pain, Doc Miller examining his ribs with practiced hands. When he saw her, something like wonder crossed his features. Valentina, you came. Of course I came. She knelt beside him, taking his hand carefully. What were you thinking, getting kicked by a horse? Wasn't my plan. He tried to smile, but winced. Damn animal got spooked by a snake. I wasn't paying attention. Couple of cracked ribs, Doc Miller announced. You'll be sore as hell for a few weeks, but nothing that won't heal. You're lucky. Could have been a lot worse. That horse could have crushed your skull instead of just your ribs. Lucky, Ethan repeated weakly. That's me. They got him into the house and settled in bed, Doc Miller leaving strict instructions about rest and limited movement. The neighboring ranchers departed, promising to check in and help with any work Ethan couldn't manage. Finally, it was just Valentina, Ethan, and Josiah, who lingered in the doorway. I'll ride out tomorrow, check on things, Josiah said. Make sure you're managing all right. Thank you, Sheriff, Ethan said. I appreciate it. Everything you did today. Just doing my job. But Josiah's eyes went to Valentina as he said it, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with jobs or duty. After he left, Valentina settled into the chair beside Ethan's bed, prepared to keep watch through the night. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip weak but determined. You were scared for me, he said softly. I saw it in your face when you rode up. Of course I was scared. You're my husband. Am I? Really? His eyes were too knowing, too clear despite the pain. Or am I just the man you're obligated to? Valentina looked at him. This kind, patient man who'd given her a home and asked for nothing but honesty in return, and felt something shift inside her chest. He could have died today. Could have been killed by a spooked horse, and she would have become a widow before she'd ever truly become a wife. The thought terrified her in a way she hadn't expected. You're my husband, she said firmly, and I was scared of losing you, not out of obligation, but because, she struggled to find the words, because you matter to me, Ethan. Maybe not in the way you want, not yet, but you matter. That's something, he said, his eyes drifting closed. It's a start. She sat with him through the night, watching him sleep, listening to his breathing. Outside, a foal was being born in the stable. She could hear its mother's restless movements, the occasional whinny. As dawn approached, she heard a commotion and went to investigate. The mare was in distress, the foal stuck somehow. Valentina knew enough about horses to recognize danger when she saw it. She ran back to the house, but Ethan was asleep, knocked out by the laudanum Doc Miller had left. There was no one to help. No one except the rider who appeared at dawn, as if summoned by her desperation. Josiah. He took one look at the struggling mare and immediately went to work, his movements sure and practiced. Valentina helped without being asked, following his terse instructions, handing him tools, holding the lamp so he could see. They worked together in tense silence, the mare's distress filling the barn. There, Josiah said finally, his voice strained with effort. I've got the foreleg. Now if she'll just... The foal came in a rush, sliding into the hay wet and weak but alive. The mare immediately began licking it clean, making low sounds of comfort. Josiah sat back on his heels, his shirt soaked with sweat and other things, and let out a long breath. That was close. Too close. Valentina found she was shaking, the adrenaline of the night catching up with her. Thank you. I couldn't have done that alone. You would have tried, though. That's what matters. He looked at her in the dim light of dawn, and the exhaustion on his face made him look younger, more vulnerable. You care about this place, about Ethan. I can see it. I'm trying to. Trying's good. Most people don't even try. He stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. I should go. Check on the rest of my round. Josiah, wait. She stood too, facing him across the barn. The foal was nursing now, the mare calm, and in the golden light of sunrise filtering through the cracks in the walls, the world felt suspended, separate from normal time and rules. What is it? I need to say something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. She took a breath. What we feel, this connection between us, it's real. I know it. You know it. But it can't go anywhere. Not because of duty or obligation, but because she struggled to articulate what she'd realized during the long night watching Ethan sleep. Because Ethan deserves better. He's a good man, and he's trying so hard to make this marriage work. And I owe it to him, to myself, to really try too. Not just go through the motions, but actually try to build something with him. I know, Josiah said quietly. I'm not saying I don't feel what I feel, but I'm saying I'm choosing not to act on it. I'm choosing my marriage, my commitment, and I need you to respect that. I do respect it. I always have. He moved toward her, stopping just out of reach. You're a good woman, Valentina Caldwell. Ethan's lucky to have you, even if it takes him some time to fully have you. And for what it's worth, I think you'll be happy. Eventually. If you let yourself be. Will you? She asked. Be happy? That's not really the point of my life, is it? I'm here to keep the peace, protect the town. That's enough. Is it? He smiled, sad and knowing. It has to be, for both of us. He left then, riding away into the morning light, and Valentina stood in the barn doorway watching until he disappeared. The foal struggled to its feet on wobbly legs, and Valentina felt something similar happening inside her, a shaky but determined attempt to stand, to move forward, to choose the life she'd committed to rather than the one she'd imagined. When she went back into the house, Ethan was awake, propped up against pillows and looking pale, but alert. I heard the commotion. The foal? A colt. Healthy. Josiah helped deliver him. He's a good man. He is. She sat on the edge of the bed, taking Ethan's hand carefully. So are you. Valentina, let me finish. She squeezed his hand gently. I've been unfair to you. Holding back, waiting for some perfect feeling to appear before I committed. But that's not how life works, is it? That's not how marriage works. You build it day by day, choice by choice. And I'm choosing you, Ethan, choosing us. Choosing to stop waiting and start being your wife in truth, not just in name. Tears shone in his eyes. You mean that? I mean it. I can't promise I'll be perfect at it. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I'm done living in limbo. I want to try, really try. He pulled her down carefully, mindful of his injured ribs, and kissed her properly for the first time. It wasn't fireworks or earth-shattering passion, but it was warm and genuine and full of promise. When they pulled apart, he was smiling despite the pain. Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell. And for the first time since arriving in Juniper Flats, Valentina felt like she truly was. The days following Valentina's decision carried a different weight, one measured in small gestures rather than grand declarations. She moved her belongings from the spare room into Ethan's bedroom while he dozed under the lingering effects of laudanum, arranging her things alongside his with careful deliberation. When he woke and saw her hairbrush on the dresser beside his razor, his smile was worth every moment of uncertainty that had preceded it. You sure about this? He asked, his voice rough with emotion and pain medication. I'm sure. And the remarkable thing was that she meant it. The decision, once made, brought a peace she hadn't expected. Not the wild passion of romance novels, but something steadier, more durable. The quiet satisfaction of choosing direction over drift. Caring for Ethan during his recovery gave shape to their new beginning. She helped him dress, changing bandages with hands that grew increasingly confident. She read to him in the evenings from Jane's loaned books, adventure stories and poetry that Ethan listened to with closed eyes and small smiles. They talked more in those weeks than they had in all the time before. Real conversations that moved beyond weather and cattle prices to dreams and fears, and the small details that make up a life. My father used to beat my mother, Ethan said one night, the confession coming in the darkness after Valentina had blown out the lamp. Not often, but enough. I swore I'd never be that kind of man, that if I ever had a wife, I'd treat her with respect, even if I didn't always know how to show love. Valentina found his hand under the covers. You're nothing like your father. You're one of the kindest men I've ever known. Kind's not the same as passionate, though, is it? I see the way you look sometimes, like you're searching for something more than what I can give. Maybe I was. But I'm learning that more isn't always better. Sometimes enough is exactly right. He turned his head on the pillow to look at her in the moonlight, filtering through the new curtains. Do I feel like enough? She considered the question honestly. You feel like home, and I think that might be more important than passion. I'll take it. He squeezed her hand gently. It's more than I hoped for. They didn't consummate the marriage that night. His ribs were still healing, and both of them knew rushing would serve no one. But they slept side by side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and in the morning, when she woke to find him watching her with something like wonder, she felt the first stirrings of what might eventually become love. The church social arrived on a crisp October evening when the air smelled of wood smoke and the stars seemed close enough to touch. The church hall had been transformed by weeks of Clara and Valentina's efforts. Autumn leaves pressed and strung like garlands, candles in mason jars casting warm light, tables laden with food brought by every family in town. A small band consisting of a fiddle, guitar, and accordion struck up a lively tune as people began to arrive. Valentina stood near the refreshment table, smoothing her dress nervously. She'd made it herself from the fabric Clara had brought, a deep green that brought out the warmth in her skin. Ethan stood beside her, still moving carefully but healing well, pride evident in every glance he sent her way. You did all this? Martha said, looking around in amazement. Valentina, it's absolutely beautiful. Clara helped. Clara provided materials and encouragement. You provided vision. Jane appeared with a cup of punch, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. You have real talent. Have you thought about doing this professionally? Planning events, I mean. Lord knows this town could use someone with an artistic eye. The idea planted itself in Valentina's mind like a seed. Professional work. Something that was hers, that used skills she'd been afraid would atrophy out here in the prairie. I hadn't considered it. Consider it, Jane said firmly. Women need income of their own, even married women. Gives us power, independence. And you clearly have a gift. As the evening progressed, Valentina found herself drawn into the community in ways she hadn't been before. Women asked about her decorating techniques. Men thanked her for making the event special. Children ran past trailing leaf garlands that had come loose, laughing. And through it all, Ethan stayed close, his hand finding the small of her back, his voice introducing her not as my mail-order bride, but simply as my wife, Valentina. When the dancing started, he led her to the floor despite his still tender ribs. They moved carefully through a simple waltz, her hand in his, their bodies learning the rhythm of moving together. Happy? He asked softly. She looked around at the community they were becoming part of, at the life they were building, at the man who held her with such careful devotion. Getting there. That's all I can ask. But as they turned, Valentina saw Josiah standing near the door, watching. He wasn't in his uniform for once, but dressed in what must have been his Sunday best, dark trousers, white shirt, vest. He looked uncomfortable, like a man playing a role that didn't quite fit. When their eyes met across the crowded room, he nodded once, a gesture that contained both acknowledgement and goodbye, then turned and left. Valentina felt a pang in her chest but didn't follow. She'd made her choice, and she meant to honor it. Some doors, once closed, needed to stay that way. The evening wound down near midnight, townspeople drifting home with full stomachs and lighter spirits. As Valentina and Clara worked to clean up, the blonde woman pulled her aside with excitement dancing in her eyes. 3 families asked if you'd help plan their Christmas celebrations, and Mrs. Patterson wants you to decorate the boarding house for the holidays. Valentina, people are actually willing to pay you for this. Pay me? The concept felt foreign, thrilling. Of course pay you. This is skilled work. You can't be expected to do it for free. Clara hugged her impulsively. I told you that you'd find your place here. You just needed time. As Ethan drove them home under a sky brilliant with stars, Valentina leaned against his shoulder and thought about Clara's words, finding her place. Maybe that's what all of this had been about. Not finding perfect love or grand passion, but finding where she fit in the world, who she could become when she stopped fighting and started building. The weeks that followed brought their own challenges and triumphs. Ethan's ribs healed slowly, and Valentina took over more of the ranch work than she'd imagined possible. She learned to milk cows, mend fences, even assist with difficult calvings. Her hands, once soft from city life, grew calloused and strong. Her body, once unused to physical labor, became capable and resilient. She also began taking on decorating commissions, small at first, just helping neighbors arrange their homes for holidays. But word spread quickly in the small town, and soon she had more work than she could handle. The money she earned went into a jar in the kitchen, coins and occasional bills that represented something more valuable than their monetary worth. They represented choice, independence, the ability to be both wife and individual. "You should get a proper bank account," Ethan said one evening, watching her count the week's earnings. "Keep your money safe." "It's our money," Valentina corrected, "for the ranch, for improvements." "No." He was firm about this. "It's your money, earned by your labor. I won't take it. Use it for whatever you want. Save it, spend it, invest it. But it's yours." The gesture touched her deeply. In a world where married women's earnings legally belonged to their husbands, Ethan's insistence on her financial independence was radical, generous. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me as a partner, not just a wife." Aren't they the same thing? They should be, but they often aren't. Winter came hard that year, blizzards that trapped them in the house for days at a time. Valentina had dreaded the isolation, but found instead that the forced proximity brought unexpected intimacy. They played cards by lamplight, read aloud to each other, talked about everything and nothing. And one night, when the wind howled outside and the fire burned low, Ethan reached for her with question in his eyes, and she answered yes. Their physical union was tender rather than passionate, awkward in places, but genuine. Afterward, lying in the darkness with his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Valentina felt a settling in her soul. This was her life now, not the one she'd imagined in San Antonio, not the one she'd briefly glimpsed in storm-gray eyes, but this one. Real, imperfect, hers. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, his hand making gentle circles on her back. "Yes. Are you?" "Better than all right." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this. Thank you for being worth choosing." Spring arrived with a rush of green across the prairie, wildflowers carpeting the land in impossible colors. Valentina planted an ambitious garden, vegetables, and flowers, mixed together in glorious profusion. She sketched the landscape constantly, filling page after page with studies of clouds and grasses and the play of light across distant hills. Some of these sketches she framed and sold through Clara's store, another small stream of income that made her feel capable and valued. It was on a warm May afternoon, 4 months after the church social, that the letter arrived. Ethan brought it from town, his expression unreadable as he handed it to her. The return address made her breath catch. San Antonio. Her mother. "Do you want privacy?" Ethan asked gently. "No, stay." She opened it with shaking hands and began to read. Her mother's handwriting was shakier than before, the letters wandering across the page. The news was exactly what Valentina had expected and dreaded. Her mother's illness had progressed. The doctors gave her perhaps another month. She wanted to see Valentina one last time, to say goodbye properly, to know that her daughter was truly settled and cared for. "I have to go," Valentina said, tears streaming down her face. "I have to see her." "Of course you do." Ethan pulled her into his arms. "We'll both go. I'll arrange everything." "You can't leave the ranch, not with calving season." "The hell I can't. You need me, so I'll be there. The ranch will survive." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "You're my wife, Valentina. Your family is my family. Your grief is my grief. We face it together." The journey to San Antonio felt surreal, the landscape reversing itself, prairie giving way to rolling hills, then to the outskirts of the city she'd left behind. It looked smaller than she remembered, more cramped and dirty. The noise that had once been familiar now seemed harsh after months of prairie silence. Her mother's boarding house was in a shabby neighborhood Valentina remembered all too well. They climbed the narrow stairs to the tiny room where her mother lay, propped against pillows, frighteningly thin and pale. "Mija," her mother whispered, tears spilling down her hollow cheeks. "You came." "Of course I came, Mama." Valentina knelt beside the bed, taking her mother's frail hand. "I brought my husband. Ethan, this is my mother, Rosa." Ethan stepped forward, hat in hand. Mrs. Ortiz, I'm honored to meet you. Rosa studied him with eyes that missed nothing despite their dimness. You treat my daughter well? I try, ma'am, every day. And you, mija? Are you happy? Valentina thought about the question, about the complicated truth of her answer. I'm building happiness, mama, day by day. It's not what I expected, but it's real. That's all I wanted. Rosa's grip tightened weakly. For you to have a real life, a good life. Not to end up like me, alone, poor, wasted. You're not wasted, mama. You gave me everything you could. They stayed 3 days, taking turns sitting with Rosa, making her as comfortable as possible. Ethan proved his worth in those difficult days, handling practical matters with quiet efficiency, giving Valentina space to grieve while making sure she ate and rested. When Rosa died peacefully in her sleep on the 3rd night, he held Valentina while she sobbed, his strength the only thing keeping her upright. They buried Rosa in a small cemetery on the edge of town, Valentina and Ethan the only mourners besides the priest. As they stood over the fresh grave, Ethan's arm around her shoulders, Valentina whispered goodbye to her mother and to the life she'd left behind. Ready? Ethan asked gently after she'd stood silent for long minutes. Yes. She looked at him, this good, steady man who'd become her anchor, and felt gratitude so profound it ached. Let's go home. The return journey was quieter, both of them lost in thought. But when the familiar shapes of Juniper Flats appeared on the horizon, Valentina felt something lift in her chest. Relief, recognition, the feeling of returning to where she belonged. The town welcomed them back with casseroles and condolences, practical kindness that meant more than flowery words. Clara cried with Valentina, and Jane offered books as comfort, and even the church ladies who'd once judged her softened, recognizing grief as the great equalizer. But it was on a quiet evening 2 weeks after their return that Valentina truly understood how much her life had changed. She was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard hoofbeats and looked up to see Josiah riding toward the house. Her heart did that familiar flutter, but it was gentler now, more like remembering than longing. He dismounted and walked to the garden fence, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Caldwell, heard you were back. I'm sorry about your mother. Thank you, Sheriff. Josiah, he corrected gently. We're past formalities, I think. Josiah, then. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. What brings you out here? Official business, actually. We caught the man who'd been cutting Ethan's fences, a drifter with a grudge against settlers. He's in custody now. Thought Ethan would want to know. That's good news. He's out checking the north pasture if you want to tell him yourself. I'll catch him another time. Josiah hesitated, then said, You look well, different than when you first arrived. I am different. This place changed me. She smiled, and it was genuine, uncomplicated by regret. Thank you, by the way. For what? For being honest that day in the barn. For helping me see what I needed to see, and for respecting my choice. Your choice was the right one. Ethan's a good man, and you're good for each other. I can see it. He remounted his horse, looking down at her with those storm-gray eyes that no longer made her ache. You're happy here. It shows. I am happy, or at least I'm learning how to be. That's all any of us can do. He touched his hat brim in farewell. Take care, Valentina Caldwell. You too, Josiah Mercer. She watched him ride away, but this time she didn't feel loss. She felt gratitude for what had been, that moment of connection that had forced her to examine what she truly wanted, and peace with what was. Some loves were meant to be lessons rather than lifetimes, signposts rather than destinations. That evening, she and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The colt born the night of Ethan's accident ran in the corral, all gangly legs and boundless energy. In the garden, vegetables were growing strong. Inside, the house was filled with small touches that made it distinctly theirs. Valentina's sketches on the walls, Ethan's books on the shelf, their lives woven together in countless small ways. Sheriff catch you up on the fence cutters? Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. He did. That's a relief. It is. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I saw you talking to him. How'd that feel? Valentina considered the question, appreciating Ethan's willingness to ask rather than assume. Like closing a chapter, a short one, but important. Do you regret how things turned out? Choosing me instead of what? A fantasy? A possibility that was never really real? She turned to face him fully. Ethan, what I feel for you isn't passionate or dramatic, but it's deeper than I expected, more solid. You're my partner, my friend, my home. That matters more than fireworks. You sure? Because I'd understand if... She kissed him, stopping the words. When she pulled back, she said firmly, I'm sure. I'm exactly where I want to be. Summer arrived with heat that shimmered off the prairie and waves. Valentina's decorating business thrived, and she began teaching art classes to children on Sunday afternoons, passing on skills her mother had taught her. The money she earned went into their savings, building toward Ethan's dream of expanding the ranch. But it was on an August morning, kneeling in the garden, feeling inexplicably dizzy, that Valentina understood how profoundly her life had transformed. She'd missed her monthly courses twice now, and her breasts were tender, her stomach unsettled in the mornings. She was pregnant. The realization should have terrified her. She was barely 24, still learning to be a wife, nowhere near ready to be a mother. But instead she felt a calm certainty settle over her like a blessing. She told Ethan that evening on the porch, their customary meeting place for important conversations. He stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through shock, joy, and terror before settling on something like awe. You're sure? As sure as I can be. I'll see Doc Miller tomorrow to confirm, but yes, I'm sure. He pulled her into his arms so tightly she squeaked in protest. I'm going to be a father. We're going to be parents. We are. She laughed at his enthusiasm, at the wonder in his voice. Are you happy? Happy? Valentina, He pulled back to look at her, tears shining in his eyes. I never thought I'd have this. A wife who chose me, a home that's really a home, and now a child. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. We'll be terrified, absolutely terrified. We'll make mistakes, constantly. But we'll figure it out together. Together, he agreed, and kissed her with a tenderness that took her breath away. Doc Miller confirmed the pregnancy the next day, predicting a March baby. The news spread through town with the speed of wildfire, and suddenly Valentina was inundated with advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, and knowing smiles from women who'd walked this path before. Clara was ecstatic. A baby! Oh, Valentina, this is wonderful. I'm going to spoil this child absolutely rotten. Please don't. One of us needs to maintain some discipline. Where's the fun in that? Jane was more practical, showing up with books on childbirth and infant care. Knowledge is power. Read these. Ignore half of what people tell you. Most of it's superstition anyway. Even the church ladies softened completely, offering to organize a quilting bee to make blankets for the baby. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been forbidding when Valentina first arrived, gave her a hand-carved cradle that had belonged to her own children. You've done well here, the older woman said gruffly. Not every city girl could have adjusted. But you put in the work, made a real marriage, built a real life. The baby's lucky to have you for a mother. The praise, unexpected and heartfelt, brought tears to Valentina's eyes. She'd arrived in Juniper Flats as an outsider, a mail-order bride everyone expected to fail. But she'd become one of them through persistence and genuine effort, earning her place in this community brick by brick, day by day. Winter returned, gentler than the year before, or perhaps Valentina was just better prepared for it. She sewed baby clothes by lamplight while Ethan built a cradle to match the one Mrs. Patterson had given them. They debated names and argued good-naturedly about whether to paint the nursery blue or yellow, finally settling on pale green that would work for either a boy or girl. On a February evening with snow falling softly outside, Ethan came into the bedroom where Valentina was resting. The baby made her tired now, her belly round and obvious, and sat on the edge of the bed with something in his hands. I made something for you, he said, suddenly shy. It's not much, but... He held out a small wooden box, beautifully carved with flowers and vines. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a ring. Not the simple gold band he'd given her at their wedding, but something more intricate, with a small stone that caught the lamplight. Ethan, it's beautiful. It's not a diamond or anything fancy, just a garnet. But the color reminded me of your dress at the church social, and I wanted—" He took a breath. "I wanted to give you something that wasn't out of obligation or arrangement. Something that says, I choose you, Valentina. Every day, I choose you." She let him slip the ring onto her finger beside her wedding band, tears streaming down her face. "I choose you too. Every single day." He leaned forward and kissed her, his hand resting gently on her swollen belly where their child grew. In that moment, Valentina understood that this quiet, steady love built on choice and effort and showing up was worth more than any passion that burned hot and fast. The baby arrived on a March morning when the prairie was just beginning to green, a lusty-voiced boy they named Thomas after Ethan's grandfather. The birth was difficult. Doc Miller worked for hours while Ethan paced outside, wearing a path in the floorboards. But when they finally placed the baby in Valentina's arms, she felt a love so fierce it nearly stopped her heart. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, his finger carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. "You're perfect. How did I get this lucky?" "We got lucky," Valentina corrected. "Both of us." The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting and terrifying and wonderful. They took turns walking the floor with a colicky baby, changed countless diapers, and survived on almost no sleep. But through it all, they worked as a team, supporting each other through the hardest moments and celebrating the smallest victories. Clara visited constantly, bringing meals and cooing over the baby. Jane brought more books, on child development this time. The whole town seemed to take collective ownership of young Thomas Caldwell, with neighbors stopping by to drop off food or offer help or simply admire the new addition. It was on one of these visits, about a month after Thomas's birth, that Josiah appeared. Valentina was on the porch with the baby in her arms, enjoying the spring sunshine, when she saw him riding up. Her heart no longer fluttered at the sight of him. That door had closed completely, but she smiled with genuine warmth. "Sheriff Mercer, it's been a while." "It has." He dismounted and approached the porch, his eyes going to the bundle in her arms. "This must be the famous Thomas. Heard he's got the loudest cry in 3 counties. He certainly makes his presence known." She adjusted the blanket so Josiah could see the baby's face. "Would you like to hold him?" Something like panic crossed Josiah's features. I'm not good with babies." "No one is at first. Come on, he won't break." Josiah took the baby with the careful terror of a man defusing a bomb. Thomas, perverse child that he was, immediately settled and blinked up at the sheriff with calm interest. Josiah stared down at him, something unguarded crossing his face. Longing, perhaps, or regret, or simply the universal response to new life. "He's beautiful," Josiah said quietly. "You and Ethan must be very proud." "We are. Exhausted, but proud." Ethan emerged from the barn and saw them, and for a moment tension hung in the air. Then Ethan smiled and walked over, extending his hand to Josiah. "Sheriff, good to see you. I see you've met my son." "Just did. He's a fine boy." Josiah handed Thomas back to Valentina with visible relief. "I actually came by because I'm leaving Juniper Flats." The announcement landed like a stone in still water. "Leaving?" Valentina asked. "Why?" "Got an offer to be marshal up in Silver City. Better pay, bigger town, more challenges." He looked between them, his expression carefully neutral. "It's time for me to move on. Been here almost 5 years, longer than I've stayed anywhere. Time for a change." "We'll miss you," Ethan said, and meant it. "You've been a good friend and a good lawman." "Thank you. That means a lot." Josiah's eyes went to Valentina one last time. "Take care of each other. Take care of that boy. And be happy. You've earned it." "You be happy too," Valentina said softly. "You deserve it as much as anyone." "Maybe I'll work on that in Silver City." He smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Goodbye, Valentina. Goodbye, Ethan. It's been an honor knowing you both." They watched him ride away one final time, and Valentina felt the last thread of what might have been finally break free and blow away on the spring wind. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders, and Thomas made a small sound of contentment. "You all right?" Ethan asked. "Yes, it feels like the universe tidying up loose ends." She leaned into him. "Making sure I know exactly where I belong." "And where's that?" "Here." With you, with our son, building this life we've made together. It's a good life, isn't it? She looked out at the ranch, the house that was finally, truly home, the land they worked together, the future they were building day by patient day. Thomas stirred in her arms, and Ethan's hand covered hers, their rings catching the light. It's a very good life, she agreed. Not the one I expected when I got on that stagecoach, but better, real, mine. Ours, Ethan corrected gently. Ours, she agreed, and knew it was true. The years that followed brought more children, 2 daughters born in quick succession, filling the house with noise and laughter and endless laundry. Valentina's decorating business evolved into something more substantial, and she began teaching art classes in a small studio Ethan built for her behind the house. The money she earned helped expand the ranch, buying more land and cattle, building toward security and prosperity. But more than the business success or the growing family or the material comforts they accumulated, what mattered was the solid foundation they'd built. Through droughts and difficulties, through childhood illnesses and financial setbacks, through the 1,000 small challenges that make up a life, they faced everything together. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan presented her with a gift, a leather-bound book filled with her sketches that he'd been secretly collecting over the years. The earliest ones from San Antonio, the tentative drawings from her first weeks in Juniper Flats, the increasingly confident work as she'd found her voice and her place. The final pages showed their children, their home, the life they'd built. "This is your story," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the girl who arrived on a dusty stagecoach to the woman you've become. I wanted you to see how far you've traveled." Valentina turned the pages with tears streaming down her face, seeing her journey laid out in graphite and ink. "Thank you. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me. Thank you for making a life with me, for choosing me every day, even when it wasn't easy. Especially when it wasn't easy." She closed the book carefully. That's when the choosing matters most. They stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and amber. Thomas was 13 now, already helping seriously with ranch work. The girls played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal against the darkening sky. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, as he had 100 times over the years. And as she had every time before, Valentina considered the question honestly before answering. She thought about the girl she'd been, frightened, uncertain, running from a life that felt too small. She thought about the moment at the way station when she'd met a man with storm-gray eyes and felt possibility open up like a door. She thought about the choice she'd made to close that door and walk through another one instead. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." "Even though you came here looking for a husband and found something else entirely?" She smiled, leaning into his familiar warmth. "I came here looking for a husband, but I found my heart instead, found myself, found home. That's so much more than I was looking for." Ethan pulled her close, and they stood together as the stars began to emerge, the same vast prairie sky that had intimidated Valentina on her first night now familiar as a friend. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and earth and growing things. Somewhere a coyote called, and another answered. The sounds of the land that had once terrified her now simply the sounds of home. "You know what the best part is?" Ethan said quietly. "What's that?" "We get to keep building this, keep choosing each other, keep making this life together for years and years to come." "Years and years," Valentina agreed, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. She'd come to Juniper Flats as Valentina Ortiz, a mail-order bride with no real choice and less hope. But she'd become Valentina Caldwell through choice and effort and the daily work of building something real. She'd learned that love wasn't always about passion and fireworks. Sometimes it was about showing up, about choosing commitment over convenience, about building a partnership that could weather any storm. As the children's laughter filled the air and Ethan's arms held her close, Valentina closed her eyes and sent a silent thank you to the universe for the strange, circuitous path that had brought her here, to the mother who'd pushed her toward practical choices, to the sheriff who'd shown her what she didn't want so she could recognize what she did, to the husband who'd been patient enough to let her find her way to loving him, but most of all to herself, for having the courage to keep trying, to keep choosing, to keep building this life day by day until it became something beautiful and true and entirely her own. "Ready to go in?" Ethan asked as full darkness fell. "It's getting cold." "In a minute." She turned in his arms to look back at the house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the life they'd created together. "I just want to stand here a moment longer and appreciate it all." "Appreciate what?" "This. Us. The quiet promise we made to each other and kept. The life we built from nothing but hope and effort." She smiled up at him. "I once thought home was a place you came from, but I've learned it's actually a place you build, one choice at a time, with someone who's willing to build it alongside you." "That's beautiful," Ethan said softly. "You should write that down, maybe sketch something to go with it." "Maybe I will." She took his hand and let him lead her toward the house, toward the warmth and light and noise of their family. "But first, let's go see what trouble our children have gotten into. I heard a crash from the kitchen earlier that sounded expensive." He laughed, and the sound carried across the prairie, mixing with their daughter's giggles and Thomas's deeper voice as he tried to restore order. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a life that Valentina had built from dust and determination and the quiet promise she'd made to keep showing up. She'd come west looking for a husband, but had found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found herself, found purpose. Found a love that wasn't about fireworks, but about the steady warmth of a hearth fire that never went out. And as she stepped through the door of her home, her family's voices rising in welcome, Valentina Caldwell smiled and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd followed the horizon and found her heart, and that was more than enough. It was everything.